when the sheriff's voice crackled through the radio. No shelter for your type of people? 53 Hells Angels knew they had been sentenced to death, minus 38 degrees, zero visibility, 2 hours before the first man would stop breathing. But what happened next would make national headlines, bankrupt a woman who had nothing left to lose, trigger a confrontation that left a sheriff in tears on camera, and reunite a father with the daughter who had been stolen from him 11 years ago. This is the story of Eleanor Reed, and the choice that turned a dying diner into something the world has never forgotten. Eleanor Reed had not slept in 43 hours. She stood behind the counter of the Pinewood Diner, her fingers trembling around an envelope that contained the end of everything. The paper was crisp, official, merciless. Final notice of foreclosure. 11 days. The words blurred together as tears she refused to shed gathered in her eyes. $412 in the register, $918 owed to Montana Power before they cut the heat. $47,000 total debt accumulated over 12 years of grief and neglect, and the slow, quiet surrender of a woman who had stopped caring whether she lived or died. The numbers didn't work. They hadn't worked for years. Outside the window, the February sky hung low over Hollow Creek, Montana. Population 873 souls clinging to existence in a forgotten corner of the Rocky Mountains. The town sat 3 miles off Route 89, invisible to anyone not specifically looking for it, which meant almost nobody ever came. Eleanor folded the foreclosure notice with the precise, careful movements her mother had taught her 60 years ago. She slid it into her apron pocket, where it pressed against the bottle of nitroglycerin tablets. 14 pills left, $220 for a refill she couldn't afford. She had already chosen between medicine and electricity once this winter. Next time, she might have to choose between medicine and food. The diner smelled like coffee that had been sitting too long, and the ghost of bacon grease embedded in walls that had absorbed 31 years of cooking, laughter, tears, and silence. So much silence these past 12 years. Her husband Frank had built this counter with his own hands in 1987. She remembered watching him sand the wood until it gleamed, remembered the pride in his eyes when the first customer sat down and ordered coffee. "This is ours, Ellie," he'd said, "something we built, something that'll last." He had collapsed behind this same counter 19 years ago, mid-sentence, mid-smile. His heart had simply stopped, and he had been gone before his body hit the floor. She still remembered the sound, that terrible, final thud, still felt it in her bones on quiet nights when the diner was empty and the memories pressed close. And then there was Michael. Her son had carved his initials under the third booth from the door when he was 8 years old, MJR, Michael James Reed. She could still feel the grooves if she ran her fingers along the wood, still see his gap-toothed grin when she discovered his vandalism and tried to be angry but couldn't. Michael had deployed to Afghanistan 12 years ago. He'd been 21, the same age Frank had been when they'd met, the same stubborn jaw, the same kind eyes. He'd hugged her at the airport and promised he'd come back. He came back in a flag-draped box 11 years ago. They gave her a folded flag and words that were supposed to mean something. Your son died a hero. Your son served with honor. Your son, your son, your son. She'd stopped counting the years after that. Eleanor looked at the clock on the wall. 4:47 p.m. In 11 days, First Regional Bank of Montana would take the diner, take Frank's counter, take Michael's booth, take the last physical evidence that her family had ever existed. She had already started planning what she would fit in a single suitcase, already researched shelters and billings, already accepted, in the quiet depths of her heart, that this was how it ended, not with dignity, not with peace, but with a 63-year-old widow carrying everything she owned in a bag and hoping someone would give her a bed. The wind rattled the windows. Eleanor looked up, frowning. The sky had darkened in the last 20 minutes, not the gradual dimming of approaching evening, but something else, something that made the hair on her arms stand up. She had lived in Montana all 63 years of her life. She knew what that color meant. The radio crackled. She'd had it on for background noise, tuned to the local station that played country music and reported livestock prices. But now a voice cut through, urgent and afraid. National Weather Service has issued an emergency blizzard warning for Park County and surrounding areas. A Category 5 winter storm system has accelerated faster than projected and will make landfall within the next 15 to 20 minutes. This is not a drill. Residents are advised to shelter immediately. Do not attempt travel under any circumstances. Wind speeds are expected to exceed 70 miles per hour, with visibility dropping to 0. Wind chill temperatures will reach minus 38 degrees. This is a life-threatening emergency. Repeat, this is a life-threatening emergency. The coffee mug slipped from Eleanor's fingers. It shattered on the floor, dark liquid spreading across the linoleum like blood. She didn't look down. She was staring at the window, watching the sky turn the color of bruises, watching the first snowflakes begin to fall, not gently, not peacefully, but sideways, driven by a wind that screamed as it built. 17 minutes later, the world disappeared. 11 miles northwest on a stretch of Rogers Pass that wound through the mountains like a scar, 53 men were dying. The snow didn't fall, it attacked. It came horizontal, a white wall of ice and fury that reduced visibility to nothing in under 90 seconds. The temperature plummeted so fast that exposed skin began to freeze on contact with the air. Darrell Cross had been riding motorcycles for 38 years. He'd crossed deserts in August when the asphalt melted beneath his tires. He'd driven through the tail end of a hurricane in Florida because a brother needed him, and nothing, not wind, not rain, not the wrath of God himself, stopped a Hell's Angel from answering that call. But this was different. This was nature saying, I will kill every single one of you, and there is nothing you can do about it. Get off the bikes! His voice barely carried over the howling wind. Everyone off! Group together! Around him, 52 other motorcycles were going down, some deliberately dismounted, others simply toppled by gusts that hit like fists. Brothers from Billings, Great Falls, a handful from Spokane who'd joined the ride to pay respects at a funeral in Missoula. They'd been 15 minutes from shelter when the sky decided to end them. Hammer? Shade materialized from the white nothing, his beard crusted with ice, his lips already turning blue. Thomas Whitfield, Sergeant-at-Arms, 41 years old, veteran of 2 tours in Iraq before he'd found the club. He was the toughest man Darrell knew, and right now he looked terrified. Ricky's bike went down hard, his arms broken, bones showing through, and Bear collapsed. He's not responding. Darrell's jaw tightened. Ricky was 23, newest patch in the chapter. Bear was 59, diabetic, shouldn't have been on this ride at all, but had insisted because the man they were burying had been his cellmate in Deer Lodge State Prison 20 years ago. Get everyone in groups, share body heat, strip the saddlebags for anything insulating. Hammer, we've got 2 hours before frostbite, maybe 4 before we start losing people for real. I know. Darrell grabbed Shade's shoulder, pulled him close. There's a town, Hollow Creek, 3 miles southeast. Priest spotted a sign before visibility dropped. 3 miles? In this? It's that or we die here. Darrell's voice was flat, hard, the voice that had commanded men in situations that would break most people. Take Priest and Danny, get to that town, find shelter, find help, find anything. We'll hold as long as we can. Shade hesitated. There was something in his eyes, not fear for himself, but fear for what he was leaving behind. If we don't make it, you'll make it, that's an order. Shade nodded once. Then he was gone, swallowed by the white wall, along with Priest and Danny, 3 men walking into oblivion on the thin hope that a town 3 miles away might save 50 lives. Darrell turned back to his brothers. They'd formed clusters without being told, years of discipline and brotherhood kicking in automatically. Bikes positioned as windbreaks, bodies pressed together. Bear was on the ground, unconscious, others huddled around him trying to keep him warm. Ricky was conscious but gray-faced, clutching an arm that bent where arms shouldn't bend. 2 hours, maybe 4. Darrell pulled out his phone. No signal. Of course. They were in a dead zone even on good days, and the storm had probably knocked out every tower in the county. He tried the radio. Static. Nothing but static. They were alone. 53 men, slowly freezing to death on a mountain pass, and the only people who knew they existed were 3 brothers walking through a blizzard toward a town that might not help them even if they got there. Because earlier, before the storm hit, when they'd first realized they might be in trouble, Shade had managed to reach the sheriff's office in Hollow Creek on the radio, had explained the situation, requested assistance, asked if there was anywhere they could shelter. The sheriff's response had been 4 words: "No shelter for your type of people." Then, static. Darryl had been called many things in his 57 years: criminal, outlaw, thug. He'd earned some of those names, paid for them with time in cells and scars on his body, and a reputation that made people cross the street when they saw him coming. But he'd never been told that he and his brothers deserved to freeze to death because of the patches on their jackets. The wind screamed louder. The temperature dropped another degree. Somewhere behind him, Ricky was crying, soft, quiet sobs that the storm swallowed as soon as they left his throat. Darryl looked up at the white sky, at the snow that was burying them alive, and for the first time in his adult life, he did something he'd sworn he'd never do. He prayed. Not to any god he believed in, not to anything specific. Just out there, into the void. Get my brothers through this. I don't care what it costs me. Take everything I have. Just get them through. 3 miles away, an old woman with a failing heart was staring out the window of her dying diner. Her hand was moving toward her keys without her conscious decision. Her eyes were fixed on the wall of white that had swallowed the world. She wasn't thinking about foreclosure anymore. She wasn't thinking about herself at all. The first knock came at 7:42 p.m. Eleanor had been moving through the diner on autopilot, checking windows, testing the ancient generator that wheezed and coughed, but still produced enough power to keep the lights on, pulling blankets from the storage closet she hadn't opened in years. Preparing for what, she didn't know. The storm had turned her diner into an island, surrounded by white nothing, cut off from the world. She almost didn't hear the knock. The wind was too loud, a constant shriek that made her teeth ache and her head throb. But something made her look toward the door, instinct or luck, or maybe the same force that had made her grab her keys 20 minutes ago and then put them back, because where would she even go? The second knock was louder, desperate. She approached the door like it might attack her. Through the frost-covered glass, she could see nothing but white. But then the white shifted, and a shape emerged, and the shape collapsed against the door like a man spending his last strength. Eleanor unlocked the deadbolt with numb fingers. The wind seized the door the moment she cracked it open, nearly ripping it from her grasp. Snow and ice exploded into the diner, and with them came a body. A man. He hit the floor hard and didn't move. For 3 terrible seconds, Eleanor thought he was dead. He was blue, not metaphorically blue, actually blue, the color of a corpse left in the cold too long. Ice crystals had formed in his beard, his eyebrows, his eyelashes. His lips were purple. His fingers, exposed where his gloves had torn, were waxy white. Then he coughed, a wet, terrible sound, and spoke. 52. His voice was sandpaper on glass, barely audible over the wind still howling through the open door. 52 people, 3 miles north, dying. Eleanor's heart, her unreliable, medicated, twice-failed heart, slammed against her ribs. What did you say? The man's eyes found hers. Ice blue, fitting for someone who had just walked through frozen hell. He couldn't have been more than 45, but the cold had aged him decades. His lips cracked and bled as he tried to form words. My brothers, trapped on Rogers Pass. Storm caught us. Another cough, this one bringing up something dark. No shelter. Everyone refused. Sheriff said. He trailed off, confusion flickering across his frozen features. Why did I come here? Why did I? He was going into shock. Hypothermia shutting down his brain, making connections that didn't make sense. Eleanor grabbed his arm and dragged him away from the door. He was heavier than he looked, all muscle beneath the frozen leather, but adrenaline gave her strength she didn't know she had. She kicked the door closed, and the sudden silence of the diner felt like a physical weight. Stay with me. She was already pulling blankets from the pile she'd gathered earlier, wrapping them around his shaking body. What's your name? Shade? Thomas Whitfield? His eyes were rolling back. The others. Have to help the others. How many? 52. President sent 3 of us for help. Danny fell, quarter-mile back. Priest tried to carry him. I kept going. Couldn't stop. Couldn't. He was crying. The tears froze on his cheeks before they could fall. Eleanor's hands moved without her telling them to, stripping off his frozen jacket, his gloves, his boots. His skin was ice. She wrapped him tighter, positioned him near the heating vent, forced his fingers around a cup of coffee that had been sitting too long but was still warm. Drink. Slowly. Don't gulp. While he sipped with shaking hands, she stood and moved to the window. White nothing stared back at her. 52 people dying 3 miles away, plus 2 more somewhere between here and there. Danny and Priest, whoever they were, probably already dead. She thought about the sheriff's words. No shelter for your type of people. She thought about Michael, about the flag and the empty words and the box they'd lowered into the ground while she stood there wondering how the sky could be so blue when her world had ended. She thought about Frank and the diner he'd built and the foreclosure notice in her pocket. 11 days. What did 11 days matter if 54 men died tonight? Can you stand? Shade looked up at her. His face was slowly pinking as the warmth seeped in, but confusion still clouded his eyes. What? I said, can you stand? Eleanor was already moving to the coat rack, grabbing Frank's old jacket, the one that still smelled like sawdust and coffee and the particular warmth of a man who'd loved her for 32 years. Because if we're going to save your brothers, I need you conscious. I need you to tell me exactly where they are. Lady, you can't go out there. The roads are impassable. We couldn't make it on bikes. You don't know these roads. She pulled on the jacket, grabbed her keys, really grabbed them this time, with intention. I've been driving this pass since before you were born. I know every curve, every drift point, every place where the wind cuts and where it doesn't. She was lying. She'd never driven in anything close to this, but she'd also never stood by while people died if there was anything she could do about it. There's no chains on your tires. There's a truck out back, 1987 Ford, been running for 31 years through every winter Montana has thrown at it. Another lie. The truck barely started on good days. It'll get us there. Shade struggled to his feet. He was taller than she'd realized, 6 foot at least, and even hypothermic and exhausted, he moved like a man who knew how to handle himself, a soldier's posture, a survivor's instincts. Ma'am, you don't understand. We're Hell's Angels. The sheriff made that clear. No one in this town will help us. If you get involved, I know who you are. Eleanor turned to face him. This stranger, this biker, this member of a club that every news report, every movie, every well-meaning warning had taught her to fear. She saw the patches on his jacket still visible beneath the frost, the skull, the wings, the words that meant outlaw, criminal, dangerous. She also saw a man who had walked through a killing storm to save his brothers. I know who you are, she repeated, and I know who I am. I'm a 63-year-old widow with nothing left to lose. I've buried my husband and my son, and in 11 days the bank takes everything else. So what exactly do you think this town can do to me that hasn't already been done? Shade stared at her. She watched something shift in his ice-blue eyes. Not just surprise, but recognition. The look of one survivor seeing another. The cold might kill you. The cold might kill all of us, but sitting here won't save anyone. She threw a blanket at him. Wrap up. You're navigating. And if you pass out on me before we find your brothers, I'll leave you in a snowbank and find them myself. For the first time since he'd collapsed through her door, something like a smile crossed his frozen face. Yes, ma'am. The truck didn't want to start. Eleanor turned the key and got a groan, a wheeze, a sound like a dying animal. The engine turned over once and quit. The wind rocked the cab, and snow was already piling against the windshield, despite the fact that they'd only been sitting here for 30 seconds. Come on, she muttered. Come on, you miserable machine. 31 years of service. You owe me this. She tried again. The engine caught, coughed, died. Shade sat beside her, wrapped in blankets, his color slowly returning, but his breathing still too shallow. He hadn't spoken since they'd left the diner, conserving energy, but she could feel his tension, the coiled readiness of a man who knew they were running out of time. There's a trick, Eleanor said, more to herself than to him. Frank used to do it in the cold, something about the choke. She pulled the choke out, pumped the gas twice, turned the key while simultaneously pressing the accelerator halfway down. The engine roared to life. That's my girl. Eleanor threw the truck into gear. Hold on to something. They burst out of the small garage and into the storm. The world vanished immediately, white everywhere, above, below, ahead. The headlights illuminated nothing but swirling snow, and the wind hit the truck like a physical force, shoving them sideways. Eleanor corrected automatically, muscle memory from decades of winter driving, but this was worse than anything she'd faced before. Straight north, Shade managed. Route 89 to the pass turnoff. 3 miles, maybe 4. I know the way. She didn't really, not in this. Every landmark had been erased, every familiar sight buried under white. She was driving on instinct and prayer, keeping the truck pointed in what she hoped was the right direction, fighting the wind that wanted to push them off the road and into the ditches that would become their graves. The speedometer read 15 miles per hour. It felt like 50. Every second was a battle against physics, against nature, against the part of her brain screaming that this was suicide. "Tell me about them," she said suddenly. "Your brothers. Keep yourself awake." Shade's voice was faint, dreamlike. 52, mostly from Billings chapter, some from Great Falls, few from Spokane. We were coming back from a funeral. Brother named Cowboy. Cancer got him. Everyone wanted to pay respects. "How long have you been riding?" 23 years, since I got back from Iraq. Needed something, a family, people who understood. Eleanor navigated around a drift that loomed out of the darkness like a wall. The truck shuddered but powered through. "And the one in charge? Your president?" "Hammer, Darrell Cross." Even through the hypothermia fog, Shade's voice carried respect. "Hardest man I've ever known. Done things. We've all done things. But he's also the first one to help a stranger, first one to stand up for someone who can't fight back. Lost his wife to cancer, lost his daughter to the system, custody battle. Courts decided a biker wasn't fit to raise a kid." Eleanor's hands tightened on the wheel. "How old was she?" 6, when they took her. Lily. That was her name." Shade coughed, his whole body shaking. "He hasn't seen her in 11 years, doesn't even know where she lives. System sealed the records because he was dangerous." 11 years. The same amount of time since Michael died. 2 people, utterly different, shaped by the same span of loss. "We'll find them," Eleanor said. "We'll find all of them." The truck crested a small rise, and suddenly, through a momentary gap in the swirling white, she saw lights. Not electric lights, smaller, flickering. Flashlights, maybe, or flames, human, alive. "There!" Shade lunged forward, pointing. "That's them! That's—" The truck hit something buried in the snow, a rock, a fallen branch, some piece of debris invisible beneath the white. The steering wheel wrenched from Eleanor's hands. For one horrible second, they were spinning, sliding, completely out of control. Then the tires caught. The truck shuddered to a stop, pointed in the right direction by pure luck or divine intervention. "Go," Shade gasped. "I'll catch up. Go." Eleanor didn't argue. She threw open the door and stepped into the end of the world. The cold hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She'd thought she was prepared. 63 years in Montana, countless winters survived, more blizzards weathered than she could count. But this was different. This cold had teeth. It bit through Frank's jacket, through her sweater, through her skin, straight to the bone. Her first breath felt like inhaling glass. She pushed forward anyway. The shapes emerged from the white gradually. Dark masses huddled together, barely visible through the swirling snow. As she got closer, she could make out details. Motorcycles positioned as windbreaks, bodies pressed together in clusters of 4 and 5, faces turned away from the wind. Nobody was moving. For one horrible moment, Eleanor thought she was too late, that she'd driven through a blizzard to find 52 frozen corpses, that all of this, the risk, the hope, the desperate need to do something, had been for nothing. Then one of the shapes stirred. A head lifted. Eyes found hers through the storm. "Who the hell?" The voice was rough, barely audible. A man struggled to his feet, breaking away from his cluster. He was massive, 6'3" at least, with shoulders broad enough to block the wind. A scar ran down the left side of his face, from eyebrow to jaw. His beard was crusted with ice, his lips blue, but his eyes were still alive, still fierce, still fighting. "Eleanor Reed," she heard herself say, the words nearly stolen by the wind. "I own a diner 3 miles south. I've got a truck. I can take 6 at a time." The man stared at her. Behind him, others were beginning to stir, heads lifting, bodies uncurling from their protective huddles. She could see the hope dawning on frozen faces, and it was almost too much to bear. "Lady, you can't be serious. 6 per trip, that's 9 trips. About 90 minutes total if the roads hold." Eleanor was already calculating, her mind clicking into the same gear that had kept her diner running through 2 recessions and a husband's death. Who's most critical? Frostbite, injuries, medical conditions? The man's expression shifted. She watched him reassess her, this small, silver-haired woman in an old jacket, standing in a killing blizzard like she belonged there. "Hammer," he said. "Darrell Cross. I'm the president." "I know who you are. Your man Shade told me." Eleanor looked past him, scanning the clusters of bodies. "I need to know who goes first." Something cracked in Darrell's facade, not weakness, recognition. The look of a man who had spent his whole life being judged and feared, suddenly confronted with someone who saw him as a person instead of a threat. "Bear," he said, pointing to a cluster near the center. "Diabetic. He's been unconscious for 40 minutes. Ricky, broken arm, compound fracture, and there are 3 with frostbite showing on their fingers. They go first. Get them to the truck, back of the road, 50 yards. Shade is waiting." She turned to head back, but Darrell's hand caught her arm. Even through his frozen glove, through Frank's jacket, she could feel the desperation in his grip. "Why?" His voice cracked on the word. "Why are you doing this? You don't know us. You don't owe us anything." The sheriff said. "The sheriff is a coward who let fear make his decisions." Eleanor met his eyes, those fierce, desperate, still-fighting eyes. "I'm not." She pulled her arm free and walked back toward the truck. Behind her she heard Darrell's voice raised in command. "You heard the lady? Group 1, Bear, Ricky, frostbite cases. Everyone else, hold your positions. We're getting out of here." The first trip nearly killed them all. 6 men crammed into a truck designed for 3. Bear unconscious across the back seat, his breathing shallow, his skin gray. Ricky silent and trembling, cradling his shattered arm. 3 others with fingers and toes turning black, the kind of damage that might mean amputation if they didn't get warm soon. Eleanor drove by instinct, by memory, by sheer stubborn refusal to die in a ditch. The truck fishtailed twice, nearly went over once, and at one point she was driving entirely by feel, because the windshield had become opaque with ice, and she couldn't spare a hand to scrape it. But she made it. The Pinewood Diner appeared through the storm like a beacon, warm light spilling from windows she'd left uncovered, the neon open sign flickering but visible. Eleanor pulled up to the front door, and men spilled out of the truck, carrying Bear, supporting each other. "Get him by the heating vent," Eleanor ordered. "There are blankets in the storage closet, first room on the right. Warm water, not hot, warm, for the frostbite cases. And for God's sake, someone put coffee on." She didn't wait to see if they obeyed. She was already back in the truck, already turning around, already pointing back toward the storm, and the 46 men still waiting to be saved. Trip 2, trip 3, trip 4, each one harder than the last. The snow was piling up faster than the wind could blow it away, and the road was disappearing inch by inch. Eleanor's arms ached from fighting the steering wheel. Her heart was fluttering in ways that would have sent her reaching for the nitroglycerin under normal circumstances. But there was nothing normal about this, and the pills were back at the diner, along with everyone she'd already saved. On trip 5, she found Danny and Priest. They were huddled together in a drift a quarter mile from the main group. Danny unconscious, Priest barely conscious, both of them nearly buried by snow. Priest looked up as Eleanor approached, and the expression on his face was something she'd never forget. "Shade made it," he whispered. "He actually made it. He made it, now so will you." She loaded them into the truck with the others from that trip. Priest couldn't stop crying, silent tears that froze on his cheeks, and he held Danny's hand the entire ride back. By midnight, all 53 men were inside the Pinewood Diner. The building was not designed for 53 people. It was designed for 40 on a good day, maybe 50 if everyone squeezed tight and didn't mind bumping elbows. But the bikers didn't complain. They sat on floors, leaned against walls, packed into booths meant for 4 but now holding 7. The air was thick with the smell of wet leather and coffee and something else, relief maybe. The particular scent of people who had expected to die and found themselves alive instead. Eleanor stood behind the counter, surveying the controlled chaos, and felt something she hadn't felt in 12 years. Purpose. Her hands were shaking from exhaustion. Her heart was doing things that would have terrified her cardiologist. She had driven 45 miles through a blizzard in a truck that should have died a decade ago, and every muscle in her body was screaming for rest. But they were alive. All of them. "Ma'am," she turned. Darrell stood before her, still huge, still scarred, still the kind of man that made people cross the street, but something had changed in his face. The hardness was still there, but underneath it was something raw and vulnerable. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. His voice was hoarse. "I don't have words. I've spent my whole life being told what I am. Criminal, outlaw, scum. No one has ever." He stopped. Eleanor watched him struggle with emotions that clearly didn't come easily, watched him fight against decades of armor and pride. "You don't have to thank me," she said. "Sit down before you fall down. I'm going to make some food." She turned toward the kitchen, but his voice stopped her. "I saw the foreclosure notice in your apron pocket when you were helping Bear. 11 days. Eleanor froze. "I'm not telling you this to embarrass you," Darrell continued quietly. "I'm telling you because I want you to know what you did tonight, saving 53 men who the world had written off as worthless. It wasn't nothing. It was everything. And whatever happens with that bank, whatever comes next, you're not going to face it alone." She turned back to face him. This stranger, this outlaw, this man who had expected to die tonight and instead found himself saved by a 63-year-old widow with nothing left to lose. "That's a kind thought," she said carefully. "But in 11 days, kindness won't pay off $47,000. "No." Darrell's scarred face held an expression she couldn't read. "But maybe family will." He walked away before she could ask what he meant. Eleanor stood behind Frank's counter, surrounded by 53 men in leather and denim, listening to the storm howl outside, and felt the first stirring of something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. It was small, fragile, easily crushed by circumstance and reality. But it was there, flickering like the neon sign in the window, refusing to go out. She turned to the kitchen. 53 people needed to be fed, and Eleanor Reed, for the first time in 12 years, had a reason to cook. The first night was survival. The second night was crisis. Eleanor had not slept in 51 hours. Her body had stopped complaining somewhere around hour 40, the aches and pains fading into a dull numbness that she knew, distantly, was dangerous. Her heart fluttered every few minutes now, little skips and jumps that she ignored because there was no time to acknowledge them. The diner had transformed into something between a field hospital and a refugee camp. Bodies everywhere, on floors, in booths, propped against walls. The smell of wet leather and sweat and coffee had become so thick she could taste it. Someone had organized a rotation for the single bathroom, and there was a line of men waiting patiently, quietly, like soldiers accustomed to discomfort. Bear had regained consciousness around 3 a.m. His blood sugar had crashed dangerously low, and Eleanor had fed him orange juice and sugar packets until his eyes cleared and his hands stopped shaking. Now he sat in Michael's booth, her son's booth, with the carved initials she could trace in the dark, and watched her with an expression that made her uncomfortable. Gratitude, debt, the look of a man who knew he should be dead and wasn't. Ricky's arm had been set by a brother named Doc, not a real doctor, but a former Army medic who carried a first aid kit in his saddlebags and knew enough to stabilize compound fractures. The boy was sleeping now, dosed with painkillers that Doc had produced from somewhere Eleanor didn't ask about. The frostbite cases were recovering. Some would lose fingertips, maybe toes. But they would live. They would all live. Eleanor stood at the stove, scrambling eggs in the largest pan she owned, and tried to calculate how much longer her supplies would last. The math was not encouraging. She had fed 53 men twice already. Dinner last night, breakfast this morning. That was over 100 meals, nearly 300 eggs, 4 loaves of bread, 2 pounds of bacon, and more coffee than she usually served in a month. The refrigerator was significantly emptier than it had been 18 hours ago. At the current rate of consumption, she had enough food for maybe 36 more hours. 48 if she rationed carefully, if she served smaller portions, if she stretched every ingredient to its absolute limit. After that, they would be eating condiments and hope. The storm showed no signs of stopping. If anything, it had intensified overnight, the wind now a constant scream, the snow piling up against the windows until she could barely see out. The radio had lost signal hours ago. The power had flickered twice, and the backup generator was running on fumes. She didn't share any of this with the men. They had enough to worry about. "Ma'am?" Eleanor turned. A young biker stood in the kitchen doorway. Not Ricky, a different one. Danny. The one she'd found half buried in a snowdrift, the one Priest had been trying to carry. He was maybe 25, with a baby face that seemed almost comical beneath the leather vest and patches. "Some of the guys want to help," he said, "with cooking, cleaning, whatever you need. Priest used to work in a restaurant before he joined the club, and, I'm not useless in a kitchen. My mom taught me." Eleanor studied him. This boy playing dress-up in a dangerous world. Someone's son, someone's brother, someone who had probably broken his mother's heart when he'd put on that jacket. "Tell Priest he can help with lunch. And Danny?" "Yes, ma'am?" "Thank you." He smiled, a real smile, young and unguarded, and for a moment he looked exactly like Michael had at that age. "No, ma'am, thank you." The crisis came at 4:17 p.m. Eleanor was in the walk-in cooler, counting what remained when she heard the commotion, raised voices from the main room, not angry, alarmed, the particular pitch of people responding to an emergency. She pushed through the kitchen door and found chaos. Bear was on the floor again, his massive body convulsed, his eyes rolled back, and foam bubbled at the corners of his mouth. 3 men held him down while Doc knelt beside him, checking pulse, checking breathing, shouting instructions. His sugars crashed again. "I need glucose, actual glucose, not just sugar water. Does anyone have— I have insulin in my truck." Eleanor's voice cut through the noise. "Emergency supply. I keep it for— It doesn't matter. It's in the glove compartment." Doc looked up at her. "Ma'am, insulin won't help if his sugar's low. He needs the opposite. He needs something to raise his levels fast." "I know. But after his levels stabilize, he'll need insulin to regulate. I also have glucose tablets in the medical kit. Frank was diabetic too before—" She didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. The problem was the truck. The truck was outside, 50 feet from the door, buried under God knew how much snow. The storm had not let up for 18 hours. Wind chill was still lethal. Visibility was 0. Eleanor was already moving toward the door. "Ma'am, you can't go out there." Shade materialized beside her, still wrapped in blankets, still recovering from his own brush with death. "Let one of us—" "You'll never find it. You don't know where I parked, don't know what the truck looks like under all that snow." She grabbed Frank's coat from the hook. "I'll be 5 minutes. Keep him stable." "Eleanor," Daryl's voice behind her. She turned. He stood at the back of the crowd, his scarred face unreadable. But his eyes, those fierce, calculating eyes, held something she hadn't seen before. Fear. Not for himself. For her. "You go out there with your heart condition. In this storm, you might not come back." "I know. You'd risk your life for a man you met 18 hours ago?" Eleanor looked at Bear, still convulsing on her floor, looked at the men surrounding him, their faces tight with fear and hope and desperate faith that somehow this would be okay. "I'd risk my life," she said slowly, "for any human being who needed help. That's who I am. That's who my husband was. That's who my son would have wanted me to be." She pulled on Frank's coat. 5 minutes. Have warm blankets ready. She opened the door and stepped into the white void. The cold hit her like a hammer. She had thought she was prepared this time, remembered from the rescue runs, knew what to expect. But 18 hours of continuous storm had deepened the cold, sharpened it, turned it into something that felt almost personal. The wind didn't just push, it attacked. The snow didn't just fall, it assaulted. Eleanor put her head down and walked. She couldn't see the truck, couldn't see anything except white in every direction. But she knew where she'd parked. 31 years of pulling into the same spot had built muscle memory that even a blizzard couldn't erase. 20 steps. 30. Her lungs burned with each breath. Her heart was doing something irregular, skipping beats, adding extra ones, the kind of arrhythmia her cardiologist had warned her about. She didn't have her nitroglycerin. It was in her apron pocket inside the diner, impossibly far away. 40 steps. Her foot hit something solid. The truck's bumper buried under 2 feet of snow. She fell to her knees and began digging. Her hands went numb almost immediately. She couldn't feel her fingers, couldn't tell if she was making progress or just rearranging snow. But she kept digging, kept pushing, kept fighting, because somewhere inside that diner a man was dying and she was the only one who could save him. Her hand found the door handle, frozen solid. She pulled, twisted, slammed her palm against it. Nothing. "Come on!" Her voice was stolen by the wind, but she kept talking anyway. "Come on, you miserable machine! Open! Open!" She slammed her fist against the handle one more time, and something cracked, ice breaking, and the door swung free. The glove compartment. She yanked it open, hands so numb she could barely grip. Medical kit, glucose tablets, the insulin vials she kept for emergencies, for the neighbors who sometimes couldn't afford their prescriptions, for anyone who needed help. She shoved everything into her pockets and turned back toward the diner, and couldn't find it. The white was absolute. The wind had shifted while she was digging, and now she had no idea which direction she'd come from. The diner's lights, which should have been visible through the storm, were swallowed by snow so thick it might as well have been a wall. Eleanor's heart lurched, not from the arrhythmia this time, from pure primal fear. She was going to die out here. 50 feet from safety, she was going to freeze to death because she couldn't find her way back. "Eleanor!" The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, torn apart by the wind. She turned toward it, or thought she did, and took a step. "Eleanor, follow my voice." Daryl. She recognized the rasp, the authority. She couldn't see him, but she could hear him, and she stumbled toward the sound. "Keep talking," she called back, or tried to. Her lips were too frozen to form proper words. "Keep—" She fell. Landed hard on something solid. The porch steps, she realized. She'd made it back. Hands grabbed her, hauled her upright, dragged her through a door that slammed shut against the howling wind. Warmth hit her like a wall, and she gasped, her lungs burning as they adjusted to air that didn't try to kill her with every breath. "Glucose tablets." She shoved her frozen hands into her pockets, produced the supplies. "Give him 2. Wait 10 minutes. If he's still crashing, give him 2 more. The insulin is for after, only after, his levels stabilize." Doc grabbed the supplies and ran. Eleanor sagged against the counter, Frank's counter, 31 years of memories, and tried to remember how to breathe. "You're insane," Daryl's voice, beside her. She looked up into his scarred face and saw something that might have been anger, might have been admiration, might have been both. "You almost died out there." "But I didn't." She managed a weak smile. "And neither will Bear." "You don't know that." "No, but I know that he had a chance, and a chance is better than nothing." She pushed herself upright, ignoring the way her legs trembled. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to check on lunch." She walked toward the kitchen on legs that threatened to buckle with every step. Behind her, she heard Daryl say something to Shade, too quiet for her to catch, and she filed it away to wonder about later. Right now, there were 53 people to feed, and Eleanor Reed did not stop until the job was done. Bear stabilized by evening. His color returned, his breathing steadied, and by 8 p.m., he was sitting up in Michael's booth, eating soup like a man who'd been starving for a week. Doc hovered nearby, checking vitals every few minutes, but the crisis had passed. Eleanor sat in the booth across from him, too exhausted to stand any longer. Her hands were wrapped around a cup of coffee, her 7th of the day, or maybe her 10th, she'd lost count, and she watched Bear eat with a satisfaction that surprised her. "Thank you." His voice was rough, barely audible. "For the glucose, for everything." "You're welcome. You could have let me die, stayed inside where it was safe. No one would have blamed you." "I would have blamed me." Eleanor took a sip of her coffee. It was too hot, but she didn't care. "My husband was diabetic. I watched his sugar crash more times than I can count. I know what it looks like. I know how fast it can turn fatal." She paused. "I wasn't going to watch it happen again, not if I could do something about it." Bear studied her. He was a big man, maybe 300 pounds, most of it muscle running to fat, with tattoos covering every visible inch of skin and a beard that reached his chest. The kind of man who made people nervous just by existing. But his eyes were gentle, kind. "You're different," he said finally, "from everyone else we've met, from everyone who looks at the patches and decides they already know who we are. Maybe I'm just too old to care about patches." Eleanor smiled. Or maybe I've learned that the outside of a person tells you exactly nothing about the inside. She stood, ignoring the protest from her knees. Get some rest. You're not out of the woods yet, and I need you healthy enough to leave when the storm breaks. She was halfway to the kitchen when his voice stopped her. Mrs. Reed, she turned. The foreclosure notice. Hammer told us. Bear's gentle eyes held hers. We don't forget debts, and we don't abandon family. I'm not family. I'm just a woman with a diner. No, Bear shook his head slowly. You stopped being just a woman with a diner the moment you drove into that storm. Now you're one of us, whether you want to be or not. He went back to his soup, and Eleanor stood frozen for a long moment, trying to process what he'd said. Family. The word echoed in her mind as she walked back to the kitchen. Family taking care of family. She had lost her family, lost Frank to a failing heart, Michael to a distant war. For 12 years she had been alone, truly alone, in the way that only the childless widowed could understand. And now, 53 strangers in leather jackets were calling her family. She didn't know what to do with that, so she did the only thing she knew how to do. She cooked. The storm began to weaken on the evening of day 3. The wind, which had been a constant shriek for 62 hours, dropped to a howl, then a moan. The snow continued to fall, but lighter now, drifting instead of driving, accumulating instead of attacking. Through gaps in the white curtain, Eleanor caught glimpses of stars. They were going to survive. The realization hit her as she stood at the window, watching the storm die. 53 men were going to walk out of this diner alive. Every single one of them. She had done that. She had made that happen. Eleanor, Daryl's voice behind her. She turned. He stood in the doorway to the kitchen, holding something in his hands, an envelope, worn and creased, that she recognized immediately. Her foreclosure notice. I found it in the trash, he said. You threw it away last night. It seemed appropriate, given that I'm probably not going to be alive to face foreclosure anyway. Don't say that. His voice was sharp. Don't you dare say that. Daryl, do you know what you've done? He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the ice still melting in his beard, the exhaustion etched into his scarred face. You saved 53 lives. You risked your own life, multiple times, for people you'd never met, people you had every reason to fear, people the whole world has told you to avoid. I didn't do anything special. I did what any decent person— No, the word cracked like a whip. No. You don't get to minimize this. You don't get to pretend it was nothing. His voice dropped, raw with emotion. I've been in this club for 34 years. I've met thousands of people, and I have never, not once, not ever, encountered anyone like you. Eleanor didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. $47,000. Daryl looked at the foreclosure notice in his hands. That's what they want to take your diner. Everything you've built, everything your husband built. It's just a building. Bullshit. The curse was almost tender. It's not just a building and you know it. It's your husband's counter, your son's booth, 31 years of memories. He paused. I know what it's like to lose everything that connects you to the people you loved. I lost my wife, lost my daughter. All I have left are memories, and sometimes those aren't enough. For the first time, Eleanor saw past the scars and the leather and the fearsome reputation. She saw a man who was just as broken as she was, just as alone. The brothers took a collection, Daryl said quietly, while you were in the kitchen this evening. Everyone contributed, everything they had in their wallets. Most of us don't carry cash anymore, but what we had, we gave. He pressed the envelope into her hands. It was thicker now, stuffed with bills. It's not much, $3,200. It won't save your diner. His scarred face held an expression she couldn't read. But it's a start. And Eleanor, I need you to hear this. It's not charity. It's not pity. It's family taking care of family. Eleanor looked at the envelope. $3,200, more money than she'd seen in one place in years. I can't accept this. You can, and you will. Daryl's voice was firm. You gave us everything. Your food, your shelter, your medicine, your heart medication, for God's sake. You don't get to refuse when we try to give something back. Daryl, 11 days. He held up the foreclosure notice, the one she'd thrown away. The storm should break completely by tomorrow. We'll be gone within hours. But I want you to remember something. What? In 11 days we're coming back. Eleanor stared at him. What? I don't know how yet. I don't know what will bring or how many brothers I can mobilize, but I'm going to make some calls, call in some favors, and in 11 days, when that bank thinks they're going to take your diner, they're going to find out that Eleanor Reed isn't alone anymore. He turned and walked away before she could respond. Eleanor stood at the window, holding an envelope full of cash and a foreclosure notice that suddenly felt different, lighter somehow. In 11 days. She didn't believe him, couldn't believe him. He was a biker passing through, a stranger she'd helped in a storm. He had no reason to come back, no obligation to keep a promise made in a crisis. But something in his voice had sounded like truth. Something in his eyes had looked like determination. And for the first time in 11 years, Eleanor allowed herself to feel something she had forgotten existed. Hope. The sun rose on day 5 to reveal a transformed world. The storm had died sometime in the early hours of the morning. Eleanor had been sleeping finally, her body having overridden her mind's insistence that there was still work to be done. When she woke, curled on the floor behind the counter with a blanket someone had draped over her, the first thing she noticed was silence. No wind, no howling, no constant screaming reminder that nature was trying to kill them. She stood slowly, her joints protesting 4 days of abuse, and walked to the window. White, everywhere, but not the attacking white of the storm, a peaceful white, glittering in early morning sun. The snow had buried cars, fences, road signs. Drifts reached second-story windows on some of the nearby buildings. The world had been completely remade, but the sky was blue, that impossible, perfect Montana blue. They had made it. Behind her, the diner was stirring, men waking, stretching, talking in low voices. The smell of coffee brewing. Someone had started a pot without being asked. The particular energy of people who had survived something together and were beginning to process what that meant. Hell of a view. Shade appeared beside her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one, and she took it gratefully. Hell of a storm. Hell of a woman. He smiled, a real smile, not the guarded half-expressions she'd seen from most of the brothers. You know, when I knocked on your door 4 days ago, I expected you to call the sheriff, or slam the door in my face, or both. The thought crossed my mind. But you didn't. No, Eleanor sipped her coffee. I didn't. Why? She considered the question. It deserved a real answer. He had walked through a blizzard to save his brothers, and she had driven through one to save them. They had both chosen to act when staying still would have been safer. Because I was dying anyway, she said finally. Not physically, not then, but inside. 12 years of just existing, going through the motions, waiting for the end. She turned to face him. When you knocked on my door, you gave me a reason to live. Does that make sense? More than you know. Shade's ice blue eyes were soft. That's why most of us joined the club, not for the reputation or the patches, because we were dying inside, and the brotherhood gave us a reason to keep going. They stood in companionable silence, watching the sun rise over a world made new. The plows arrived at 10:17 a.m. Eleanor heard them before she saw them, the growl of heavy engines, the scrape of metal on asphalt, the sound of civilization remembering that these mountains existed. Behind the plows came the emergency vehicles, fire trucks, ambulances, sheriff's cruisers with lights flashing, and leading them all, the distinctive white SUV of Sheriff Daniel Martinez. The diner emptied quickly. 53 men in leather and denim filing out into the snow, forming up in the parking lot with the unconscious discipline of people who had spent their lives being watched, being judged, being prepared for confrontation. Darryl stood at the front. Eleanor watched him transform, the exhausted, vulnerable man she had glimpsed over the past 4 days, disappearing behind armor made of scars and reputation. She walked out to stand beside him. You should stay inside, he said, not looking at her. This could get ugly. Then you'll need a witness. Martinez emerged from his SUV, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. He was a big man, not as big as Darryl, but big enough, with the weathered face of someone who had spent his life in these mountains. His eyes swept over the assembled bikers, the damaged diner, the small silver-haired woman standing next to the most dangerous-looking man in the group. Cross. His voice was flat. Got reports of a large gathering. You boys need to move along. We're leaving. Daryl's voice was equally flat. Soon as our bikes are dug out. See that you do. Martinez's hand tightened on his weapon. Don't need your type causing trouble in my county. Our type. Daryl took a single step forward, just one, but it was enough to make Martinez's hand twitch toward his gun. You mean the type that nearly froze to death while you sat in your warm office? The type you told to die because of the patches on our jackets? Martinez's face went pale, then red. Now wait a minute. I remember exactly what you said, Sheriff. No shelter for your type of people. Those were your exact words. Daryl's voice dropped to something quiet and deadly. 53 men, fathers, brothers, sons. You decided we deserved to die without even asking our names. I made a judgment call. Your organization has a reputation. Our organization built 3 houses for Habitat for Humanity last year. Our organization raised $200,000 for veterans charities. Our organization escorts children to school when they're being bullied and shows up at funerals when soldiers come home in boxes. Daryl was advancing now, each word punctuated by a step. What has your organization done lately, Sheriff? Besides letting people freeze? Martinez's hand was fully on his gun now. Behind Daryl, 52 brothers tensed, not reaching for weapons, not making aggressive moves, but preparing. Ready. Eleanor stepped between them. Gentlemen. Her voice was calm, steady, the voice of a woman who had spent 30 years managing drunk customers and difficult suppliers. This is my property, and on my property, we don't have confrontations, we have conversations. She turned to Martinez, the man who had refused to help, the man who had decided that 53 people deserved to die because of the patches they wore. Sheriff, these men are leaving. They'll be gone within hours and you'll never see them again. She held his gaze. But I want you to know something first. What's that, Mrs. Reed? While you were safe and warm, deciding that human beings weren't worth saving because of their appearance, I drove into that storm. Her voice didn't waver. I made 9 trips, 45 miles total, in conditions that could have killed me, and I saved every single one of them. She stepped closer. Martinez's hand fell away from his weapon, almost involuntarily. I'm 63 years old. I have a heart condition. I hadn't slept in 2 days, and I did what you refused to do, because someone had to. She paused. That's the difference between us, Sheriff. When I see people in need, I help them. When you see people in need, you check their patches first. Silence. The wind had picked up slightly, blowing snow across the parking lot in glittering swirls. Somewhere behind her, Eleanor heard someone whisper, "Holy shit." Mrs. Reed, Martinez started. I'm not finished. Eleanor's voice cracked like a whip. You're going to leave now. You're going to let these men dig out their motorcycles in peace, and you're going to drive back to Hollow Creek and think about what kind of man you want to be. Because right now, you're the kind of man who lets people die. And that's a choice you'll have to live with. She turned her back on him, walked back toward the diner. The kind of man who lets people die, she repeated, loud enough for everyone to hear. Remember that the next time you look in the mirror. The door closed behind her. Through the window, she watched Martinez stand frozen for a long moment, watched Daryl say something to him, too quiet to hear. Watched the sheriff turn and walk back to his SUV, his shoulders hunched, his confident swagger gone. The emergency vehicles followed him out of the parking lot. The plows continued their work, opening roads, restoring connections to the outside world. And 53 Hells Angels stood in the snow, staring at the diner door, at the woman who had just done what none of them had ever seen anyone do. Stand up for them. The goodbye took 3 hours. The brothers dug out their motorcycles with borrowed shovels and bare hands when necessary. They checked engines, tested brakes, made the small repairs that 4 days of snow burial had made necessary. Throughout it all, they came to Eleanor in 1s and 2s and small groups. Shade came first. I owe you my life, he said simply. I walked into your diner more dead than alive, and you didn't hesitate. You didn't ask questions. You just helped. He pressed something into her hands, a challenge coin, worn smooth from years of handling. On one side, the Hells Angels' death's head. On the other, the words, Brothers Forever. This is my lucky coin. Carried it through Iraq, through prison, through every bad situation I've ever been in. His ice-blue eyes were bright with emotion. He was clearly fighting. "I want you to have it." "Shade, I can't." "You can. You're one of us now, whether you want to be or not." Ricky came next, his broken arm in a sling that Doc had fashioned from a torn t-shirt. He couldn't have been older than 23, and he was crying openly. "You saved my life. I was alone out there, lost in the snow. And you found me." He hugged her with his good arm, nearly lifting her off her feet. "I'm going to tell my mother about you. She's going to want to send you a thank you card, probably cookies too. She makes amazing cookies." Eleanor laughed despite herself. "I'd like that." Bear came next, then Doc, then Priest, then Danny, then name after name after name, 52 men who had entered her diner as strangers and were leaving as something else. Family. The word kept coming up. Family taking care of family. And finally, Darryl. He stood before her on the porch of the Pinewood Diner, his scarred face unreadable. Behind him, 52 motorcycles idled in the parking lot, their engines creating a rumble like distant thunder. 11 days, he said. "Darryl, I know you don't believe me. I know you think I'm going to ride out of here and forget about everything that happened." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a piece of paper, worn, folded, covered in handwriting. "This is my personal number, my real number, not the club phone. You need anything, day or night, you call." She took the paper. Her hands were trembling. "And Eleanor?" He waited until she met his eyes. "That thing I said about coming back? I meant it. I don't know how yet. I don't know what it's going to look like. But in 11 days, when that bank shows up to take your diner, they're going to find out that you're not alone." "How can you promise that? You don't know me." "You don't owe me? I owe you everything." His voice cracked slightly. "You gave me hope, Eleanor. You showed me that there are still good people in this world, people who help strangers just because it's the right thing to do. I haven't believed that in a very long time." He reached out and took her hand, held it gently, carefully, the way one held something precious. "My wife used to say that kindness creates ripples. You do something good for someone, they do something good for someone else, and eventually those ripples come back to you." He squeezed her hand. "Well, Eleanor Reed, you threw one hell of a rock into the water, and those ripples are coming." He released her hand and walked toward his motorcycle. 11 days, he called over his shoulder. "Keep your phone charged." She wanted to call after him, wanted to say something, anything, that would express what these past 4 days had meant to her, but her voice wouldn't work, and then he was mounting his bike, and then 53 engines were roaring to life, and then they were moving. The column formed up on the highway, a river of chrome and leather stretching into the distance. At the front, Darryl raised his hand in a final salute. Then they were gone. Eleanor stood on the porch of the Pinewood Diner and watched until even the sound of their engines faded to nothing. The sun was bright, the sky was blue, and the world was impossibly quiet. She looked down at the paper in her hand. Darryl's number, written in precise block letters. 11 days. She went inside, locked the door, and for the first time in 96 hours, allowed herself to collapse. 9 days of silence. Eleanor had returned to her routine, opening the diner at 6 a.m., cooking for customers who gradually trickled back as roads reopened, closing at 8 p.m., collapsing into exhausted sleep. The rhythm was familiar, comforting, normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. She caught herself looking at Michael's booth and seeing Bear's grateful face, caught herself standing at Frank's counter and remembering Darryl's rough voice saying, "Family taking care of family." Caught herself reaching for her phone a dozen times a day, wondering if she should call, if she should believe, if she should hope. She didn't call. Hope was dangerous. Hope was how you got hurt. The foreclosure deadline crept closer. 9 days became 8, 8 became 7, 7 became 6. The bank sent a reminder notice, final warning before legal action. Eleanor read it, folded it carefully, and threw it in the trash. What else could she do? The phone rang at 4:47 p.m. on day 9. Eleanor was behind the counter, wiping down surfaces that were already clean because she needed something to do with her hands. The diner was empty, the afternoon lull before the dinner rush that probably wouldn't come. She answered on the third ring. "Pinewood Diner." Eleanor. 1 word, 4 syllables, and the world shifted on its axis. Daryl, you sound tired. His voice was warm through the static of a cell connection. Have you been sleeping? Some. Not really. Have you? A low chuckle. Some, which meant no. Listen, I need you to sit down. Eleanor lowered herself into Michael's booth. Her fingers found the carved initials automatically, tracing the familiar grooves. I'm sitting. Good. Because what I'm about to tell you is going to sound insane, and I need you to stay calm. A pause. Background noise. Voices. Engines. The ambient sound of many people in motion. What do you know about viral news stories? Viral? Like the internet? Exactly like the internet. She could hear something in his voice. Excitement, maybe, barely contained. Shade's nephew works for a news website in Denver. Young kid, hungry for stories. Shade told him about you, about the storm, about what you did. Eleanor's stomach tightened. Daryl. He wrote an article. Posted it 4 days ago. We weren't sure anyone would notice. Another pause. They noticed? What do you mean? I mean it got picked up. First by a bigger website, then by a TV station in Billings, then by one in Denver. His voice was rising now, unable to contain itself. This morning, a producer from CNN called the nephew asking for your contact information. The words didn't make sense. They bounced off her brain without penetrating. I don't understand. You're famous, Eleanor, or you're about to be. Elderly widow saves 53 Hells Angels in blizzard. That's the headline. It's everywhere. A beat of silence. And people want to help. Help how? The article mentioned the foreclosure, mentioned what you sacrificed to save us. His voice softened. People started reaching out. Regular people, not bikers. They want to know where they can send money. Eleanor's hand was shaking. She gripped the phone tighter, trying to steady herself. Daryl, I can't accept money from strangers. Why not? You saved strangers. What's the difference? It's different. How? She opened her mouth to answer, closed it, opened it again. She didn't know. Eleanor, listen to me. His voice was patient but intense. What you did during that storm, it wasn't just about us. It was about something bigger. It was proof that people can still be good, that strangers can still help each other, that all the fear and division in this country hasn't killed basic human decency. That's a lot of weight to put on some soup and blankets. It's not about the soup. She could hear him breathing, could feel the intensity radiating through the phone. It's about the choice. You had every reason to stay inside, every reason to turn us away, but you didn't. You risked everything, your health, your safety, your future, to help people the world had written off. I just did what anyone would do. No. His voice was firm. You did what no one else was willing to do. The sheriff refused. The whole town refused. You were the only one who said yes. And people need to see that. They need to know that kind of courage still exists. Tears were streaming down Eleanor's face. She didn't bother wiping them away. What do you want me to do? Right now? Nothing. Just be ready. The story is spreading and it's not going to stop. A pause. And Eleanor? In 2 days, when the bank deadline hits, you're not going to face it alone. You keep saying that. But Daryl, even if people donate money, $47,000 is... Eleanor. What? Keep your phone charged and maybe clear out your parking lot. Why? She could hear the smile in his voice, the same smile she'd seen on his scarred face when she'd told him to get out of her way. Because you're going to have visitors, a lot of them. The line went dead. Eleanor sat in Michael's booth, the phone pressed against her chest, trying to process what she'd just heard. Famous. She was famous, or becoming famous, for doing something she hadn't even considered heroic. The phone rang again, different number this time. Pinewood Diner. Mrs. Reed? This is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News in Billings. I was hoping to schedule an interview about your incredible act of heroism during the blizzard. She hung up. The phone rang again. And again. And again. By the time she gave up counting, she had 17 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. The news van arrived at 7 a.m. on day 10. Eleanor had barely slept. The phone had rung through the night. Reporters, producers, people claiming to represent organizations she'd never heard of. She'd stopped answering after the 20th call. Now she stood behind the counter, watching through the window as a van with the logo of a Billings television station pulled into her parking lot. Two people emerged, a young woman with perfect hair and an expensive coat, and a man carrying a camera that looked like it cost more than Eleanor's truck. Behind them, another van was pulling in. Then another. By 8 a.m., there were 7 news crews in her parking lot. Eleanor looked at herself in the reflection of the coffee pot, silver hair she hadn't combed, face lined with exhaustion and age. The same flannel shirt she'd worn yesterday because she hadn't had the energy to change. This was who they wanted to interview. This was the face they wanted to put on television. She thought about hiding, about locking the door and pretending she wasn't here, about letting all this attention pass her by, returning to the quiet anonymity that had been her life for 63 years. Then she thought about Daryl's words. People need to see that kind of courage still exists. She straightened her spine, smoothed her hair with her hands, walked to the front door. The reporters descended like a flock of well-dressed birds, all talking at once, shoving microphones toward her face. "Mrs. Reed, how did you know the bikers were out there? What made you decide to risk your life? Were you scared? Did you know they were Hell's Angels?" Eleanor held up her hands. The crowd fell silent, not completely, but enough. "One at a time," she said, "and someone better make some coffee because this is going to take a while." The interviews lasted until 3 p.m. Every reporter asked the same questions, phrased slightly differently. Every time, Eleanor told the truth. "Why did you help them?" "Because they were dying. Because it was the right thing to do. Because my husband and my son would have expected nothing less from me." "Weren't you afraid?" "I was terrified. But fear isn't a reason to let people die. Did you know they were Hell's Angels?" "I knew, and I didn't care. A person is not their patches. A person is not their reputation. A person is what they do when it matters." The reporters ate it up. Eleanor watched their eyes light up with each answer, watched them glance at their cameras to make sure they were catching everything. By evening, the story had exploded. One of the reporters showed her on his phone. The video of her interview had been viewed 400,000 times, 500,000. The number climbed while she watched. Comments scrolled beneath the video. "This woman is a hero. Faith in humanity restored. Where can I donate?" "This is what America should be." Eleanor handed the phone back. Her hands were shaking too badly to hold it. "I don't understand. Why do people care? I'm nobody. I'm just—" "You're exactly what people need right now." The reporter, a young woman named Sarah, barely older than Michael would have been, looked at her with something like reverence. "You're proof that good people still exist, that kindness isn't dead, that courage isn't just for movies and fairy tales." Eleanor didn't know what to say to that, so she went back to the diner, locked herself in the bathroom, and cried until she had nothing left. The call from the bank came at 9:17 p.m. "Mrs. Reed," a voice she didn't recognize, professional but with an undertone of something else, nervousness maybe. "This is Harold Morrison, Regional President of First Regional Bank of Montana." Eleanor's heart sank. The regional president didn't call personally unless something serious was happening. "Mr. Morrison, I'll be direct. I've been fielding calls all day about your account, media inquiries, concerned citizens, and about an hour ago I received a very unusual communication." "What kind of communication?" "Someone has started fundraising campaigns on your behalf. Multiple campaigns, actually. We've identified at least 4 separate ones." A pause that seemed to stretch forever. "As of 30 minutes ago, those campaigns have collectively raised $89,000. Eleanor's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the floor, the phone cord stretching. "I'm sorry, did you say $89,000, and it's still climbing? Every minute more donations come in." Another pause. "Mrs. Reed, in my 30 years of banking, I've never seen anything like this. That's almost twice what I owe." "Yes, it is." His voice was strange, almost awed. "There's something else. The unusual communication I mentioned, it came from a law firm in Phoenix. They represent something called the Hell's Angels Legal Defense Fund." Eleanor started laughing. She couldn't help it. "Mrs. Reed? I'm sorry. It's just—" "What did they say?" "They informed us that any attempt to foreclose on your property would be met with immediate legal action, extensive media coverage, and, I'm quoting directly, resources beyond your institution's ability to comprehend. A moment of silence. They also mentioned that 2,000 bikers are planning to arrive at your location tomorrow morning. The laughing stopped. 2,000? That's what they said. His voice had a slight tremor now. Mrs. Reed, I want you to know, I voted against pursuing your foreclosure last month. I was overruled. But for what it's worth, I'm glad it worked out this way. He cleared his throat. Consider all collection activities on your account suspended, effective immediately. We'll sort out the details when the dust settles. The line went dead. Eleanor sat on the floor of her diner, phone pressed against her chest, staring at the ceiling. 2,000 bikers, tomorrow morning. She thought about Daryl's words. Keep your parking lot clear. You're going to need it. She started laughing again, and crying, both at the same time until she couldn't tell the difference. Tomorrow was day 11, and nothing was going to be the same. Eleanor woke to a sound she had never heard before. It started as a whisper, a distant vibration that hummed through the walls and floor of the Pinewood diner. She lay on the cot she'd set up in the storage room, blinking at the ceiling, her sleep-fogged brain trying to categorize the noise. Not thunder, not wind, not the rumble of trucks on the highway. Something else, something alive. The sound grew, swelled, became a roar that shook the windows and rattled the dishes in the cupboards. Eleanor sat up so fast her vision swam, her heart lurching in that dangerous way her cardiologist had warned her about. Engines, hundreds of them, thousands. She grabbed Frank's coat and ran. The front door of the diner burst open, and Eleanor stepped into a world transformed. The highway had become a river, not water, chrome, leather, steel. An endless stream of motorcycles flowing toward her from both directions, filling every lane, spilling onto the shoulders, stretching to the horizon in both directions like some impossible metal serpent. The morning sun caught the chrome and exploded into 1,000 points of light, blinding, beautiful, impossible to look at directly. The sound was beyond anything Eleanor had ever experienced, not just loud, but physical, a vibration that she felt in her bones, her teeth, her heart. Her hand found the doorframe. Her knees threatened to buckle. At the front of the column, a single rider broke formation. His bike was massive, black and chrome, gleaming like a weapon, and even from 50 yards away, Eleanor recognized the shape of him, the broad shoulders, the scarred face, the way he moved like a man who had been born in the saddle. Daryl Cross killed his engine in her parking lot. The sudden silence was almost more overwhelming than the noise had been. Morning, Eleanor. She couldn't speak. Her voice had fled somewhere south of her throat and showed no signs of returning. Behind Daryl, the column kept coming. Bike after bike after bike, peeling off into her parking lot, onto the highway shoulder, into the fields on either side of the diner. Men dismounting. Women, too. She hadn't noticed women before, but there they were, just as leather-clad, just as fierce-looking, just as impossible. They moved with military precision, organization, purpose, like an army that had drilled for exactly this moment. How many? Eleanor finally managed. The words came out as a croak, barely audible. Last count? Daryl swung off his bike, removed his helmet, ran a hand through gray-streaked hair. His scarred face held something she'd never seen on it before. A smile. A real smile, wide and unguarded. 2,117. We put out the call the day we left. Every chapter from Seattle to Denver. Some came from farther. California, Arizona, Texas, a few from Canada. Word spread. 2,117. The number was incomprehensible. She had saved 53. And now 2,000 more had crossed mountains and deserts and state lines to stand in her parking lot. I don't understand. Her voice was steadier now, but not by much. Why would they, all these people, for me? Daryl walked toward her slowly, carefully, like approaching a wild animal that might bolt. When he reached the porch, he stopped and looked up at her with those fierce, gentle eyes. You helped us, he said simply. Now we help you. That's how family works. Behind him, the sea of motorcycles continued to grow. The next 6 hours were beautiful chaos. The bikers had come prepared, not just with money, though there was plenty of that, cash stuffed into envelopes and pressed into Eleanor's hands until she needed a box to hold it all, but with tools and supplies and skills she hadn't known to ask for. A group from the Denver chapter attacked the diner's exterior. Within an hour, they had scraped away peeling paint, replaced rotted boards, fixed the broken gutter that had been dripping for 3 winters. Another group swarmed the interior, repairing split vinyl on booth seats, replacing light fixtures, scrubbing decades of grime from walls and floors. Someone produced a new sign. Pinewood Diner, it read, in letters that actually lit up, that didn't flicker or buzz or threaten electrocution. They mounted it as the sun reached its peak, and Eleanor stood in the parking lot crying while 2,000 strangers cheered. The news crews had returned in force, not just local stations now. Eleanor spotted logos from CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, NBC. Helicopters circled overhead, filming the endless sea of motorcycles. Reporters shouted questions that she couldn't hear over the roar of engines and the pounding of hammers. And still the bikers came. Still they worked. Still they pressed money into her hands and stories into her ears. Mrs. Reed, a tall man, stepped into her path, thin, weathered, with an accent that dripped Texas honey. His vest was covered in patches she didn't recognize. Name's Preacher. Rode up from Austin. 26 hours straight, only stopped for gas. He pressed an envelope into her hands. My mama passed last year. Cancer took her slow. His voice cracked. She spent her last weeks in a hospice, alone, because I couldn't get time off work to be with her. Couldn't afford it. What you did for those brothers in the storm, that's what my mama would have done. That's what good people do. He was crying now. This massive tattooed man, tears streaming into his beard. I wanted to be here. Wanted to look you in the eye and say thank you for reminding me that good people still exist. He walked away before she could respond. Another woman took his place. Then another man. Then a couple who had ridden tandem from Portland, who had celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary on the road because they couldn't miss this. Story after story after story. People who had seen the news, who had read about her online, who had been moved to cross thousands of miles because a 63-year-old widow had made soup for strangers in a blizzard. By mid-afternoon, Eleanor's face ached from crying. Her heart ached from something else entirely. The confrontation happened at 3:47 p.m. Eleanor was inside the diner, taking a break from the overwhelming attention, when she heard the commotion outside. Raised voices cutting through the general noise, the particular pitch of a crowd responding to threat. She pushed through the door and found a standoff. Sheriff Martinez stood at the edge of the parking lot, his cruiser parked at an angle that blocked part of the highway entrance. His hand rested on his holstered weapon. His face was pale, his jaw clenched. The bikers had formed a loose semicircle around him, not threatening, not quite, but present, watching. 2,000 witnesses to whatever happened next. Darrell stood at the front, arms crossed, scarred face completely unreadable. Sheriff, what brings you out here? Martinez's voice was tight, controlled. Got reports of a disturbance, illegal gathering, blocking traffic on a public highway. Funny. Darrell gestured at the highway behind the sheriff. Traffic was flowing freely. The bikers had been careful to leave lanes clear. I don't see any blocked traffic, just a lot of people who wanted to thank a woman for saving their brothers. This many people, this many motorcycles. It's a safety hazard. We've got traffic control set up at both ends of the highway. Volunteers from our chapter in Great Falls. Nobody's in danger except from the sun. Darrell's voice hardened. But you'd know about putting people in danger, wouldn't you, Sheriff? You wrote the book on that. No shelter for your type of people. Remember? A murmur rippled through the crowd. 2,000 people who all knew the story. All knew what Martinez had said during the storm. That was, Martinez started. That was you deciding that 53 human beings deserved to freeze to death because of the patches on their jackets. Darrell took a single step forward. That was you making a choice about who gets to live and who gets to die based on appearance. That was you being exactly the kind of person you swore to protect people from. Martinez's hand tightened on his weapon. Eleanor saw his finger twitch toward the retention strap. She stepped between them. Gentlemen, her voice cut through the tension like a blade. I believe I mentioned once that we don't have confrontations on my property. We have conversations. She turned to face Martinez fully. This man who represented everything wrong with Hollow Creek, everything wrong with the fear and prejudice that had let her drown for 12 years while her neighbors looked away. But she didn't see a monster. She saw a man, scared, defensive, out of his depth, a man who had made a terrible choice and was now watching the consequences unfold in real time on national television. "Sheriff Martinez," she said, "these people are on my property, with my permission. They're not blocking traffic. They're not causing disturbances. They're fixing up my diner and saying thank you for something I did during a storm." She paused. "Is there a law against gratitude?" "Mrs. Reed, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." She stepped closer. "I understand that you're embarrassed. I understand that you made a decision during that storm that you probably regret. I understand that right now, with all these cameras watching, you're trying to figure out how to save face." She gestured at the crowd behind her. "These people rode across the country for me. They fixed my diner. They saved my business. They made me feel, for the first time in 12 years, like I wasn't alone." Her voice hardened. "What did this town do? What did you do? You watched me drown and told yourselves the water wasn't your problem." Martinez's hand fell away from his weapon. "So here's what's going to happen," Eleanor continued. "You're going to get back in your cruiser. You're going to drive away. And you're going to spend some time thinking about what kind of man you want to be. Because the man you've been, the one who lets people die because they don't fit his idea of deserving?" She shook her head. "That man isn't worthy of the badge you wear." She turned her back on him. Behind her she heard Daryl say something, quiet, pointed, probably devastating. She didn't turn to listen. She was done with Sheriff Martinez. The crowd parted as she walked back toward the diner, and then, like a wave building from the shore, the applause started. It was soft at first, scattered clapping from the bikers nearest to her. Then it built, spreading outward through the sea of leather and chrome. 2,000 voices rising in approval, in admiration, in recognition of something they had just witnessed. A 63-year-old widow had just faced down a sheriff on national television. And won. Eleanor pushed through the door of the Pinewood Diner, collapsed into Michael's booth, and let herself break. By sunset, the parking lot had transformed into something magical. Someone had erected a stage, wooden platforms hauled in from somewhere, sturdy enough to hold a small band. Speakers flanked the structure, wired to generators that hummed quietly in the background. Christmas lights had been strung between lampposts, between motorcycles, between the diner and the highway sign, turning the February twilight into a wonderland of colored stars. Food had appeared from nowhere, barbecue smokers sending fragrant clouds into the evening air, coolers filled with drinks, folding tables covered in dishes that Eleanor couldn't identify, but that smelled like heaven. The bikers had taken over cooking duties, and she realized with surprise that many of them were legitimately talented. Former chefs, former restaurant owners, people whose lives had taken unexpected turns, but who still remembered how to work magic with fire and meat. Eleanor sat on the diner's porch, wrapped in a blanket someone had draped over her shoulders, watching the impossible celebration unfold. Her heart was full in a way it hadn't been since before Michael died. Daryl appeared beside her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one and settled into the chair next to hers. "Hell of a day. Hell of a life." She sipped the coffee. It was perfect, strong and hot and exactly what she needed. "I keep waiting to wake up. This can't be real." "It's real." He was quiet for a moment, watching the party below. The final count on the donations came in, $147,000, and still climbing. The number didn't even register anymore. It was too big, too impossible. "What am I supposed to do with all that money?" "Whatever you want. Pay off the diner, fix it up properly, retire to Florida and never look at snow again." He glanced at her. "Or you could do something else, something that matters." "Like what?" Daryl reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to her, waited while she opened it. It was a list, names, addresses, scattered across Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, Colorado. "What is this?" "People like you, small business owners, family restaurants, independent shops, all of them struggling, all of them on the edge of losing everything." His voice was quiet, intense. "Some of them helped us over the years, gave us shelter or food or just basic human decency when everyone else turned away. Others are just good people in bad situations, people who deserve better than what life has given them. Eleanor scanned the list. Maria's Cantina, Butte, Montana. Owner has cancer, $60,000 in debt. Henderson's Hardware, Laramie, Wyoming. Third-generation family business can't compete with big-box stores. Cookie's Kitchen, Boise, Idaho. Single mother, 4 kids. Husband died last year. 47 names, 47 stories, 47 people drowning the way she had been drowning. The money people donated, it's way more than you need, Darryl said. You could use the extra to help them, not charity, not handouts. Something better. Showing up, fixing things, reminding them they're not alone. Eleanor stared at the list. Her hands were trembling. You want me to start a… what? A foundation? I want you to start a movement. He stood, his knees cracking. But it's your choice. It's always been your choice. Whatever you decide, the brothers will support you. He started to walk away, then paused. That thing about kindness creating ripples, you threw a rock into the water, Eleanor, a big one. Now you get to decide where the waves go. He disappeared into the crowd below. Eleanor sat alone with the list and the coffee and $147,000 that she had never asked for. 47 names, 47 chances to do what had been done for her. She thought about Frank, about Michael, about all the years she had spent drowning while the world looked away, and she thought about the bikers who had come back, who had shown up, who had refused to let her sink. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number on the first entry on the list. Maria's Cantina, my name is Eleanor Reed. I heard you might need some help. The announcement came 3 days later. Eleanor stood at a podium that hadn't existed a week ago, in a parking lot that had been empty her entire life, facing a crowd that would have been unimaginable a month before. 200 people sat in folding chairs arranged in neat rows, reporters, bikers, local business owners, and representatives from organizations she had never heard of. Behind her, a banner stretched between 2 poles, Feed the Stranger, because everyone deserves a seat at the table. The name had been Darryl's idea. She had resisted at first, too religious, too on the nose, but it had grown on her. The concept was simple. A network of businesses helping businesses, people helping people, communities taking care of their own. Patricia Chen stood at her right shoulder, a lawyer from the Hells Angels Legal Defense Fund who had flown in from Phoenix specifically for this moment. She was young, mid-30s, with sharp eyes and a handshake that could crush walnuts. You ready? Patricia murmured. No, Eleanor gripped the edges of the podium. But I don't think that matters. She cleared her throat. 200 people fell silent. Thank you all for being here. I know many of you have traveled a long way, and I know my story has been told 100 times already, so I'll try not to bore you with details you already know. Light laughter from the crowd. 2 weeks ago, I was ready to give up. My husband was gone. My son was gone. My business was failing. I had 11 days before the bank took everything, and I had already started packing my suitcase for a homeless shelter in Billings. She paused. Let the words sink in. Then a storm came, and 53 strangers needed help, and I made a choice. She looked at the front row, where the original 53 sat together, Bear, Shade, Ricky, all of them. They had come back. Every single one. I want to be clear about something. I didn't make that choice because I'm brave. I made it because I had nothing left to lose. Everything I loved had already been taken. Driving into that blizzard wasn't heroic. It was the only thing I knew how to do. Her voice cracked. She steadied herself. What happened after the donations, the bikers coming back, all of this? That wasn't me. That was you. All of you. People who saw a story on the news and decided it mattered. People who reached into their pockets or got on their motorcycles or drove across the country because you believed that kindness deserves to be rewarded. She gestured at Patricia. Today, we're announcing the formation of a new organization. Feed the Stranger will identify struggling small businesses across the American West, restaurants, diners, family shops, and provide them with financial assistance, volunteer labor, and community support. The model is simple. When someone shows kindness to those in need, they shouldn't lose everything because of it. The projector behind her flickered to life. The logo appeared. A simple image of a diner with an open door, warm light spilling into darkness. We've already identified 47 businesses in 6 states that need help. Some are on the verge of foreclosure, some are dealing with medical emergencies, some are just good people in bad situations who deserve better than what life has given them. She looked at the crowd, at Darryl standing at the back with his arms crossed, at the reporters scribbling notes, at the locals who had ignored her for years and now looked uncomfortable under her gaze. The organization will be funded initially by the donations I've received, over $200,000 as of this morning, supplemented by ongoing contributions from Hell's Angels chapters across the country. But we're hoping it will grow beyond that. We're hoping it will become a movement. She took a breath. Because here's what I've learned these past 2 weeks. People want to help. They really do. They see suffering and they want to do something about it, but they don't know how. They don't know where to start. They feel helpless in the face of problems that seem too big to solve. She leaned forward into the microphone. Feed the Stranger is the answer to that helplessness. It's a way to turn compassion into action, a way to say, I see you drowning, and I'm not going to look away. A way to prove that communities still matter, that neighbors still matter, that basic human decency hasn't been killed by fear and division. She stepped back from the podium. I'm 63 years old. I have a heart condition and arthritis, and I cry at inappropriate moments. I'm nobody's idea of a leader. But I've learned something important about leadership these past 2 weeks. She found Darryl's eyes in the crowd. Leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up. It's about making the choice to help when it would be easier to look away. It's about believing that your actions matter, even when the problems seem impossibly large. She straightened her spine. So here I am, showing up, making the choice, and I'm asking all of you to do the same. She stepped back from the podium. The silence lasted 1 heartbeat, 2. Then the applause started. It built like a wave crashing through the crowd. 200 people on their feet clapping, cheering, some of them crying. The bikers at the front were the loudest, Bear's massive hands creating thunder, Shade's face transformed by a smile she'd never seen from him before. And Darryl, at the back, wasn't clapping at all. He was just watching her, his scarred face soft with something that looked almost like pride. Eleanor stood at the podium and let herself feel it. Purpose, connection, hope, all the things she had lost when Michael died, all the things she had thought were gone forever. They were back. The party lasted until midnight, but Eleanor slipped away around 10, too full of emotion to process anything more. She walked back to the diner, her diner, truly hers now, with its fresh paint and new sign and future secured, and let herself in through the back door. The kitchen was quiet, dark, exactly as she remembered it from that night 2 weeks ago, when she had stood here trying to figure out how to feed 53 hungry men with nothing but eggs and hope. She walked to the counter, Frank's counter, ran her fingers over the smooth wood he had sanded himself 31 years ago. I did it, she whispered. Frank, Michael, I don't know if you can hear me, but I did it. I helped people. I made something that matters. The silence didn't answer. It never did. But for the first time in 12 years, the silence didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like peace. Eleanor. She turned. Darryl stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the lights from outside. He had changed at some point, traded his leather vest for a flannel shirt that made him look almost ordinary. Figured I'd find you here. Needed a minute, she gestured at the counter. This is where I come to think, where I come to remember. He crossed the room and stood beside her, looking down at the worn wood. I had a place like this once. Maria's garden. She grew tomatoes and basil, and these little purple flowers I could never remember the name of. His voice was distant, remembering. After she died, I let it go to seed. Couldn't bear to look at it. Eventually the HOA complained and I had to tear it out. I'm sorry. Don't be. I was stupid. I destroyed the one place where I could still feel close to her because the pain of remembering was too much. He looked at her. You were smarter. You kept this place, even when it hurt, even when you were drowning. Eleanor didn't know what to say to that. I need to tell you something, Darryl said. Something I haven't told anyone except Shade. She waited. My daughter turns 17 next month. Lily. I haven't seen her in 11 years. His jaw tightened. The system sealed her records, said I was dangerous, said she was better off not knowing me. I've spent every day since then trying to be the kind of man who deserves to find her, trying to prove them wrong. Have you looked for her? Once, 3 years ago. I hired a PI, tracked down her adoptive family. They live in Spokane. She goes to a nice school, has friends, looks happy in the photos. His voice cracked. She looks so much like Maria. It's like seeing a ghost. Did you reach out? No, I got scared. Told myself she was better off not knowing. Told myself I'd only make things worse. He laughed, bitter. A man who's faced down prison guards and rival clubs and cops with guns pointed at his head, scared of a teenage girl. Eleanor reached out and took his hand. You should reach out. What if she doesn't want to know me? What if she hates me for abandoning her? You didn't abandon her. They took her. That's not the same thing. She squeezed his hand. And you'll never know unless you try. You'll spend the rest of your life wondering what might have happened if you'd just been brave enough to send a letter, to make a call. He was quiet for a long moment. You remind me of Maria. She used to say things like that, simple truths that cut right through all my bullshit. Sounds like a smart woman. The smartest. Too smart for me. He turned to face her fully. Eleanor, I need you to know, whatever happens with Lily, whatever happens next, these past 2 weeks have been the best of my life in 20 years, better than anything since Maria died, because of you, because you showed me that it's not too late, that people can still surprise you, that kindness still exists. His scarred face was raw with emotion he was clearly struggling to contain. You saved more than 53 lives in that storm. You saved me. From the version of myself I was becoming, hard, bitter, convinced that the world was nothing but enemies and threats. He paused. You gave me hope, and I haven't had hope in a very long time. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. I'm an old woman who made soup. You're a force of nature. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile she'd only seen a handful of times. And your family, whether you want to be or not. He lifted her hand and pressed it to his chest, over his heart. Whatever comes next, feed the stranger, the businesses we help, all of it. I'm with you. The brothers are with you. You're not alone anymore, Eleanor. Not ever again. She couldn't speak. Her throat had closed completely. So she did the only thing she could do. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, this scarred, fearsome, broken man who had become something she never expected. Family. He held her for a long time, there in the darkness of Frank's diner. And when they finally pulled apart, something had changed between them. Something had settled into place. Go find your daughter, Eleanor said. That's an order. Darryl laughed, a real laugh, surprised and joyful. Yes, ma'am. 6 weeks later, Sheriff Daniel Martinez walked into the Pinewood Diner. Eleanor was behind the counter, her counter now truly hers. No bank looming, no foreclosure threatening. The diner had been transformed in the weeks since the rally. Fresh paint, new equipment, a steady stream of customers drawn by the famous story and staying for the excellent pie. She looked up when the bell chimed, and for a moment, she didn't recognize him. Martinez had lost weight. His uniform hung loose on his frame, and there were new lines around his eyes, the marks of sleepless nights and private torment. He stood in the doorway like a man approaching his own execution. Mrs. Reed. Sheriff. The diner fell silent. A dozen customers turned to watch, regulars, travelers, a few bikers from the Billings chapter who stopped by every Tuesday for coffee and conversation. Martinez walked to the counter. Each step seemed to cost him something. When he reached her, he took off his hat and held it in his hands, turning it slowly. I came to apologize. Eleanor said nothing. She wiped her hands on her apron and waited. What I did during the storm. What I said. No shelter for your type of people. His voice cracked on the words. It was wrong. It was cowardly. And I've spent every day since then trying to understand how I became the kind of man who could say something like that. He was crying now, quiet tears that tracked down his weathered face and dripped from his jaw. My father was sheriff before me. He taught me that our job was to protect everyone, Everyone. Not just the people who looked like us or lived like us or believed what we believed. He wiped his face roughly. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. I let fear make my decisions. I let prejudice tell me who deserved to live and who deserved to die. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to know that I'm trying to change. He met her eyes and she saw something she hadn't expected. Genuine anguish. Because I need you to know that what you did, standing up to me, calling me out on national television, it woke me up, made me look in the mirror and see someone I didn't recognize. Eleanor studied him. This man who had represented everything wrong with Hollow Creek, this man who had let her drown for 12 years along with everyone else. But she also saw something else, something familiar, the look of someone desperate to be better than their worst moment. What do you want from me, Sheriff? I want to help. He swallowed hard. Feed the stranger. I read about it. The businesses you're helping, the people you're reaching. I want to be part of that. I want to prove that I can be the kind of man who helps instead of the kind who looks away. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't. I haven't earned it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. But my sister runs a restaurant in Bozeman, Rosa Martinez Williams, place called the Sunrise Cafe. She's been struggling since her husband got sick. Medical bills, can't afford help, working 18-hour days just to keep the lights on. He handed Eleanor the paper. It had Rosa's address, her phone number, a brief description of her situation. I never told anyone, never asked for help, because Martinez men don't admit weakness. His voice was bitter with self-contempt. I watched my own sister drown and did nothing because I was too proud to reach out, just like I watched you drown, just like I let those bikers freeze. Eleanor looked at the paper. Another name, another story, another person who needed help. I'll look into it. Martinez's face transformed. Relief flooded his features, so intense it was almost painful to witness. Mrs. Reed, I don't know how to thank. Don't thank me. Her voice was firm but not unkind. Prove me right. I'm giving you a chance because I believe people can change. Don't make me regret it. I won't. I swear I won't. And Sheriff? She waited until he met her eyes. The next time strangers need help in your county, I don't care who they are, what they look like, what patches they wear. You help them. That's the price of this second chance. You become the man your father taught you to be. Martinez straightened. Something settled in his spine, not the false bravado of before, but something genuine, something earned. Yes, ma'am. He put his hat back on, nodded once, and walked out of the diner. Eleanor watched him go. Then she picked up the phone and dialed Rosa's number. The call from Lily Cross came on a Thursday afternoon. Eleanor was alone in the diner, enjoying a rare quiet moment between the lunch rush and dinner prep. She had just finished reviewing the latest Feed the Stranger applications, 73 now from 12 states, when the phone rang. Pinewood Diner. Silence on the other end. Then, hesitantly, are you the Eleanor? From the news? The voice was young, female, trembling with something that sounded like fear. I suppose I am. How can I help you? Another pause. Eleanor could hear breathing, quick, nervous. My name is Lily Cross. The words came out in a rush, like she was afraid she'd lose her courage. I think you know my father. Eleanor's heart stopped, not metaphorically, actually stopped for one terrifying moment before her pacemaker kicked in and restarted it. She reached for her nitroglycerin automatically, then stopped herself. Lily, she breathed the name. Yes, I know your father. I saw the news coverage, the storm, the bikers, all of it, and they kept showing this man, the one with the scar, and talking about how he organized everything. The girl's voice wavered. I recognized him, from pictures my mom had, pictures she wouldn't explain. Eleanor lowered herself into Michael's booth. Her legs wouldn't support her anymore. Have you talked to him? No, I don't. I'm not sure. Lily trailed off. When she spoke again, she sounded younger, more vulnerable. My adoptive parents told me my real dad was dangerous, that he was in a gang, that he'd been to prison, that I was better off without him. I believed them for 11 years. And now? Now I watched him organize 2,000 people to help a stranger. The words tumbled out faster now, emotion breaking through. I watched him stand up to a sheriff. I read interviews where he talked about losing his wife, losing me, spending his whole life trying to be better than his mistakes. Eleanor closed her eyes. Thought about Darryl, the scars and the prison time and the fearsome reputation, the way he'd held her when she cried, the gentleness beneath the armor. "Mrs. Reed, I need to know," Lily's voice cracked. "Is my father a good man?" The question hung in the air like something sacred. Eleanor chose her words carefully. "Lily, your father is one of the best men I've ever known. He made mistakes when he was young. He'll tell you that himself. He doesn't hide from it. But he has spent every day since then trying to make up for them." She took a breath. "He organized that ride for me, not because I asked, not for publicity, but because he understood what it meant to need help and have no one come. He understands loss. He understands grief. He understands what it's like to have the world decide you're worthless based on how you look." "Does he," Lily's voice was barely a whisper, "does he ever talk about me?" "Every time we speak. Not always directly. It hurts him too much, but I can see it in his eyes. The same look I had when I thought about my son after he died. The look of someone whose heart has a piece missing." Silence. Eleanor could hear crying, soft, hiccuping sobs. "He loves you, Lily. He never stopped loving you, and he has spent 11 years trying to become the kind of man who deserves to find you." More silence. Then, could you give me his number? His real number, not the club phone?" "I can do better than that." Eleanor reached for the pen she kept by the register. "I can give you his number and a piece of advice." "What advice?" "Don't wait too long. Life is shorter than you think, and regret is a terrible companion." She recited Darryl's number, heard Lily writing it down. "I lost my husband suddenly. Lost my son to a war I didn't understand. I spent 12 years regretting all the things I didn't say, all the moments I took for granted. Your father is alive. He loves you. Whatever happened in the past, whatever you were told, you have a chance to know him. Don't waste it." The crying had stopped. When Lily spoke again, her voice was steadier. "Thank you, Mrs. Reed. Eleanor. Call me Eleanor. Thank you, Eleanor, for saving him during the storm, for this, for everything." The line went dead. Eleanor sat in Michael's booth for a long time, the phone pressed against her chest. Then she picked it up again and dialed Darryl's number. He answered on the second ring. "Eleanor, is everything okay?" "Everything is—" She laughed suddenly, unexpectedly. "Everything's amazing. Darryl, I just got a phone call." "From who?" "From a girl named Lily. She wanted to know if her father was a good man." Silence. Complete and total silence. "What did you tell her?" "The truth." Eleanor was crying now, but smiling too. "I told her you were one of the best men I'd ever known. I told her you loved her, and I gave her your number." She could hear him breathing, heavy, ragged, the sound of a man trying not to fall apart. "She might not call," Eleanor said gently. "She might need time. But she has your number now, Darryl. She knows the truth about who you are. That's more than you had yesterday." "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll be ready. Say you'll answer when she calls. Say you'll be honest with her, even when it's hard." "I'll be ready." His voice broke completely. "Eleanor, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me. Just answer the phone when it rings." She paused. "And Darryl?" "Yeah?" She sounded just like you described. Kind, brave, desperate to believe that her father wasn't the monster they told her about. Eleanor smiled. "I think she's going to call, and I think it's going to be okay." She hung up before he could respond. Outside the window, the sun was setting over Montana, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, turning the mountains into silhouettes against the dying light. Eleanor watched it happen, this daily miracle she had witnessed thousands of times, but never truly appreciated until now. Somewhere, a father was waiting for a phone call. Somewhere, a daughter was gathering courage. And somewhere in between, Eleanor Reed was doing what she had discovered she was meant to do. Connecting people, building bridges, refusing to let anyone drown alone. She went back to the stack of Feed the Stranger applications. There was work to do. 5 years later, Eleanor Reed stood on Rogers Pass at sunrise. The same stretch of highway where 53 men had nearly frozen to death now gleamed under a February sky so blue it hurt to look at. The asphalt was clear, dry, kissed by morning light that turned the snow-covered mountains into cathedrals of gold and shadow. 5 years ago, this road had been a death trap. Today, it was a pilgrimage site. Eleanor pulled Frank's coat tighter around her shoulders. The coat was falling apart now, threads unraveling at the cuffs, the lining torn in places, but she couldn't bring herself to replace it. Some things were worth keeping even when they stopped being practical. She was 68 years old. Her hair had gone completely silver, and the lines on her face had deepened into something she hoped looked like wisdom rather than just age. The pacemaker in her chest hummed quietly, keeping time, keeping her alive. Her cardiologist said she was doing remarkably well for a woman who had spent 4 days in a blizzard and 5 years building a national nonprofit. Remarkably well. She'd take it. Behind her, the Pinewood Diner glowed in the early light. The building had been expanded twice, once to handle the flood of customers who came from across the country to eat at the Angel's Kitchen, and once to house the Feed the Stranger headquarters on the second floor. The original structure was still visible if you knew where to look. Frank's counter, Michael's booth, the bones of a dream that had nearly died and instead become something miraculous. The sign out front had changed too. Pinewood Diner. Official way station of Feed, The Stranger S 2018. All are welcome here. That last line was Eleanor's favorite. She'd insisted on it over Patricia's objections about branding and messaging. Some things mattered more than marketing. The rumble started as a whisper. Eleanor felt it before she heard it, a vibration that traveled through the frozen ground and up through her bones. She turned toward the highway, shading her eyes against the rising sun. The horizon was moving. No, the horizon was being consumed. A wave of chrome and leather was cresting the distant hills, catching the morning light and throwing it back in 1,000 directions. The sound built and built until it was thunder, until it was an earthquake, until it was the voice of something vast and powerful and utterly, impossibly alive. The 5th annual Eleanor Reed Memorial Ride. She still hated that name. "I'm not dead yet," she'd told Darryl when he'd proposed it 4 years ago, but the brothers had insisted. "It's not about you dying," Shade had explained, his ice-blue eyes warm with affection. "It's about what you built, what you'll leave behind. Some things deserve to be remembered while the person who made them is still around to see it." The lead rider broke from the pack. Eleanor would have recognized that bike anywhere. The black Harley-Davidson with chrome pipes polished to a mirror shine, maintained with religious devotion despite, or perhaps because of, its age. The rider killed the engine and removed his helmet, revealing gray-streaked hair and a scarred face that had become as familiar to her as her own reflection. Darryl Cross was 62 now. The years had softened him in some ways, hardened him in others. The scar was still there, would always be there, but it no longer defined him. These days, when people looked at Darryl, they didn't see a criminal or an outlaw. They saw the man who had organized 5 memorial rides, raised over $2 million for struggling businesses, and somehow convinced the most feared motorcycle club in America to become the most generous. "Morning, Eleanor." "Morning, Darryl." He dismounted and walked toward her, his boots crunching on the frost-covered gravel. Behind him, the wave of motorcycles continued to pour into the valley, a river of chrome that seemed to have no end. He hugged her the way he always did, lifting her slightly off her feet, holding on just a moment too long. She'd stopped protesting years ago. Some battles weren't worth fighting. "How are you feeling?" "Like a 68-year-old woman who's been standing in the cold for an hour waiting for a bunch of show-offs on loud machines." She smiled to soften the words. "How many this year?" 3,412, he said the number with visible pride. Chapters from 43 states plus international riders from Canada, Australia, Germany, and, this is a first, Japan. Japan? Club called the Rising Sun Riders. They saw the documentary last year and decided they had to come see it for themselves. He grinned. Their president cried when he met Bear, full-on sobbing, said Bear reminded him of his grandfather. Eleanor laughed. The sound surprised her. It still surprised her sometimes how easily joy came these days. 5 years ago she had forgotten how to laugh. Now she couldn't seem to stop. "Dad, A voice from behind them. Eleanor turned and felt her heart swell. Lily Cross was 22 now, a young woman with her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn jaw. She was pulling off her own helmet, shaking out hair that had been compressed by the ride, her face flushed with cold and excitement. She had called her father 3 weeks after Eleanor gave her his number. The conversation had lasted 4 hours. The first in-person meeting, 6 months later, had been awkward and tear-filled and terrifying for everyone involved. Lily had screamed at Daryl for 20 minutes about the childhood she'd lost, the lies she'd been told, the father-shaped hole in her life that she'd spent 11 years trying to fill with anger and denial. And then she had collapsed into his arms and cried for another hour. They had been rebuilding ever since. It wasn't easy. 11 years of separation had left wounds that wouldn't heal overnight. But they were trying, showing up, choosing each other every day. Lily had graduated from Montana State last spring with a degree in nonprofit management. She now ran Feed the Strangers youth outreach program, traveling to schools across the country to talk about kindness, community, and the power of helping strangers. She was good at it, better than Eleanor had ever been. The kids loved her. The teachers loved her. The principals, who had initially been skeptical about letting a biker's daughter speak to their students, ended up requesting return visits. "Eleanor!" Lily hugged her with the same enthusiasm her father had, nearly lifting Eleanor off her feet. "Did you see? 3,400? "I saw. I'm trying to figure out where we're going to put them all. We rented 3 extra fields from the Hendersons, and the National Guard is handling traffic control this year, governor's orders." Lily was practically vibrating with excitement. CNN is doing a live broadcast at noon. The Today Show is sending a crew for tomorrow morning, and she paused for dramatic effect. "We got confirmation this morning that the president is sending a video message." "The president?" "The actual president of the United States." Lily grabbed Eleanor's hands. "Eleanor, you're getting a video message from the president." Eleanor didn't know what to do with that information. 5 years ago, she had been invisible, a forgotten woman in a forgotten town, waiting to lose everything. Now the President of the United States knew her name. "Well," she said finally, "I hope he doesn't expect me to change out of this coat." Daryl laughed. Lily laughed, and Eleanor felt something crack open in her chest. Not pain, but the opposite. The feeling of a heart that had been closed for so long, finally remembering how to be open. "Come on," Daryl said, taking her arm. "The ceremony starts in 3 hours, and you need breakfast. I'm not letting you give a speech on an empty stomach." "I've given plenty of speeches on an empty stomach. And every single one of them would have been better with pancakes." He started guiding her toward the diner. "Besides, I have news." "What news?" He glanced at Lily, who nodded. Some silent communication passed between them. The kind of shorthand that families developed over time, the language of shared history and inside jokes. "Feed the Stranger got approved for federal nonprofit status," Daryl said. "Full 501c3, retroactive to January. Patricia called this morning." Eleanor stopped walking. "Federal status, but the application process takes 2 years normally. Apparently having the president mention you in 3 separate speeches moves things along." Daryl's scarred face was split by a grin. "You know what this means, right?" She did. Federal status meant larger donations, corporate partnerships, government grants. It meant Feed the Stranger could expand beyond the American West, beyond restaurants and diners, into any community that needed help. It meant that the ripples were still spreading. "I need to sit down," Eleanor said. "That's what I've been trying to tell you." Daryl guided her toward the diner's front door. "Pancakes first, world-changing news second. I think there's a lesson in there somewhere." The ceremony began at noon. The massive tent that had become a permanent fixture of the memorial ride was packed beyond capacity. 3,400 bikers sat shoulder to shoulder with journalists, politicians, business owners who had been saved by Feed the Stranger, and ordinary people who had traveled across the country to witness this moment. The front row was reserved for the original 53. They sat together, these men who had entered Eleanor's diner as strangers 5 years ago. Some of them had changed dramatically. Bear had lost 60 pounds, gotten his diabetes under control, and now ran a Feed the Stranger chapter in Nevada. Ricky had become a paramedic, inspired by Eleanor's willingness to risk everything for strangers. Shade had retired from active club duties and served as Feed the Stranger's chief operations officer. Others had faced harder roads. Priest had battled addiction for 2 years before finally getting clean. He now counseled other veterans struggling with the same demons. Danny had lost his mother to cancer, but had channeled his grief into volunteering, spending every spare moment helping Feed the Stranger identify businesses in need. They had all come back, every single one. 5 years in a row, without fail. Eleanor stood at the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. The crowd seemed to stretch forever. Leather and denim and press badges and suits, all mixed together, all waiting for her to speak. She had written a speech. Patricia had helped her craft it, 5 pages of carefully chosen words about growth and impact in the future of Feed the Stranger. She had practiced it in front of the mirror, timed it to exactly 12 minutes. She left it in her pocket. 5 years ago, she began, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. I was ready to die. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Not physically, not right away, but inside. I'd lost my husband, lost my son. I was about to lose my business, my home, the last connections to the people I had loved. I was 63 years old, alone, and I had stopped believing that tomorrow would be any different from today. She paused, let the words settle. Then a storm came, and 53 strangers needed help. And I made a choice. She found the original 53 in the front row, Bear's gentle eyes, Shade's steady gaze, Ricky, still young despite everything, crying openly. I want to tell you something I've never said publicly before. When I drove into that blizzard, I wasn't being brave. I wasn't being heroic. I was relieved. She took a breath. Relieved to finally have a purpose. Relieved to have a reason to keep going. Relieved that if I died out there, at least I would die doing something that mattered. The crowd was absolutely silent. That's the truth. I'm not proud of it. But I think it's important to say, because I know some of you are feeling the same way right now. Some of you are drowning. Some of you have stopped believing that things will get better. Some of you are looking for a reason to keep fighting. She leaned into the microphone. I'm here to tell you that the reason exists. It might not look like a blizzard. It might not look like 53 strangers on a frozen highway, but it's out there. And when you find it, when you make the choice to help someone, to reach out, to show up even when it's hard, everything changes. She gestured at the crowd, at the cameras, at the impossible reality of what surrounded her. Look at what's happened. One woman made soup for strangers. That's all. That's how it started. And now we're standing in a tent with 3,000 people, talking about an organization that has helped 427 businesses stay open, that has provided meals to over 70,000 people in need, that has proven over and over again that kindness creates ripples that never stop spreading. Her voice cracked. She steadied herself. I'm 68 years old. I have a pacemaker and arthritis, and I still cry at inappropriate moments. I won't be standing at this podium forever. But that's okay. Because what we've built, what all of you have built, doesn't depend on me anymore. She looked at Lily, standing at the edge of the stage with Daryl. Father and daughter, reunited after 11 years, still healing, still learning, still choosing each other every day. It depends on you, on all the people in this tent and all the people watching at home and all the people who will hear this story and decide to do something about the suffering in their own communities. Feed the Stranger isn't an organization, it's an idea. And ideas don't die when the people who had them do. She straightened her spine, drew herself up to her full height, still not very tall, but somehow larger than she'd ever been. So here's my message to everyone watching, wherever you are, whatever you're facing, whatever voice in your head is telling you that you're too small, too old, too broken to make a difference. She stared directly into the nearest camera. That voice is wrong. She paused. Let the words land. You have the power to change someone's life. Not someday. Not when you're stronger or richer or more prepared. Right now. Today. All you have to do is make the choice. Help a stranger. Feed someone who's hungry. Show up for someone who's drowning. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to make the news. It just has to be real. Her voice rose. We are not defined by our worst moments. We are not limited by our circumstances. We are defined by what we do next. And what we can do, what we must do, is keep showing up for each other, keep driving into storms, keep feeding strangers, keep proving that humanity at its core is good. She stepped back from the podium. One heartbeat of silence. Then 3,400 people rose to their feet, and the applause was like nothing Eleanor had ever experienced. It was thunder. It was waves crashing on a shore. It was the sound of every ripple she had created over 5 years finally coming back to her in one overwhelming wave. She stood at the podium and let it wash over her, and for the first time in her life, she felt complete. The party lasted until after midnight. By then, most of the journalists had filed their stories, and the politicians had returned to their hotels. But the bikers remained, would always remain, as long as Eleanor needed them. They sat around bonfires in the parking lot, sharing stories and bottles and the particular warmth of people who had survived something together. Eleanor slipped away around 11, too full of emotion to process anything more. She walked back to the diner, slowly, savoring the cold air and the star-filled sky, and let herself in through the back door. The kitchen was quiet, dark, exactly as it had been 5 years ago, when she'd stood in this same spot trying to figure out how to feed 53 hungry men. She walked to the counter, Frank's counter, 36 years old now, worn smooth by decades of hands and dishes and the particular friction of daily use. She sat in Michael's booth, third from the door. Her fingers found the carved initials, MJR, and traced them slowly. "I did it," she whispered into the darkness. "Frank, Michael, I hope you can see this. I hope wherever you are, you're proud. I took the worst moment of my life and turned it into something that matters, something that helps people, something that will outlast me." The silence didn't answer. It never did. But it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt peaceful, full somehow, with all the love she had given and received over 5 years of this strange, beautiful second act. "Eleanor," she looked up. Daryl stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the fairy light someone had strung around the parking lot. "Figured I'd find you here. It's my thinking place." She gestured at the booth across from her. "Sit. My feet are too tired to stand up again." He crossed the room and slid into the booth, his scarred face soft in the dim light. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the distant sounds of the party. "Hell of a speech," he said finally. "Hell of a day. Hell of a 5 years." He reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was gentle, careful, the grip of a man who had learned that some things were worth protecting. "You know, when I rode into that storm, I thought my life was over. Not literally, I was too stubborn to die, but the part of my life that mattered, the part where good things could happen. And now? Now I have Lily. I have the club, better than it's ever been. I have Feed the Stranger and all the people we've helped." He squeezed her hand. "I have you." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. Even after 5 years, he could still surprise her. "We're quite a pair," she said. "A 68-year-old widow and a 62-year-old biker. The tabloids would have a field day." "Let them." His smile was wicked. "I've been the subject of worse headlines." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars through the diner window. Somewhere outside, someone was playing guitar, a soft, slow melody that drifted through the cold air like a prayer. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked. "After all this, after the speeches and the donations and the president's video message, what's next?" "Same thing as always," Daryl shrugged. "Wake up tomorrow, help someone who needs it, keep building what we started." He paused. "And maybe, if you're not too tired, come visit me in Billings next month. Lily's putting together a birthday party. I think she'd like you to be there." "A birthday party?" "She's turning 23. First birthday since we reconnected where she's actually letting me throw her one." His voice was rough with emotion. "She asked specifically if you'd come. Said you're the reason she has a father again." Eleanor's eyes stung. She blinked rapidly, refusing to cry again. She'd done enough of that today. "I'd be honored." "Good." He released her hand and stood, his knees cracking. "I should let you rest. Big day tomorrow. More interviews, more meetings, more people wanting a piece of the famous Eleanor Reed." "Daryl." He paused at the edge of the booth. "Thank you." The words felt inadequate, but she said them anyway. "For coming back, for keeping your promise, for all of it." His scarred face softened into something that looked almost like love. That's what family does. He walked out into the night, and Eleanor sat alone with the ghosts of everyone she'd lost and everyone she'd found. Frank's counter, Michael's booth, Daryl's promise, Lily's laughter. The names and faces of 427 businesses that still existed because of one choice she had made on a frozen February night. She closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of celebration drifting through the walls. Tomorrow there would be more work, more people to help, more ripples to create. But tonight, she was content. The Pinewood Diner still stands on Route 89, 3 miles off the main highway. These days, it's never empty. Travelers stop from across the country, across the world, drawn by a story that has been told and retold until it's become something like legend. They eat Eleanor's pie. She still makes it herself every morning, despite Patricia's objections about her workload, and they read the letters that line the walls. Hundreds of letters now, thousands, framed and displayed in neat rows, testimonials from people whose lives were changed by one woman's choice. "You saved my business and my marriage. Maria, Butte, Montana. Because of Feed the Stranger, my children still have a home. James, Laramie, Wyoming. You taught me that asking for help isn't weakness. Thank you. Rosa, Bozeman, Montana, sister of Sheriff Daniel Martinez, who now volunteers with Feed the Stranger every weekend. And in a place of honor, above the register, a single letter written in crayon on construction paper. Dear Ms. Eleanor, my mommy said you saved her restaurant. She said you are an angel, but you don't have wings. I drew you some wings. I hope you like them. Love, Madison, age 7 P.S. My daddy says thank you too. He doesn't cry at night anymore." The wings Madison drew are crude, purple and gold, asymmetrical, clearly the work of a child. But they hang in a frame that cost $300, illuminated by a small spotlight that Daryl installed himself. Eleanor looks at them every morning. They remind her why she drove into the storm. In February 2028, exactly 10 years after the blizzard, Feed the Stranger will celebrate its 500th business saved. The organization now operates in all 50 states, with international chapters forming in Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, Germany, and Japan. Over $3 million has been distributed in grants. Over 150,000 meals have been provided to people in need. The original 53 still gather every February at the Pinewood Diner. They call themselves Eleanor's Angels now, a name that makes her roll her eyes every time she hears it, but that has become something like official. Sheriff Daniel Martinez retired in 2025. His last official act was to establish a county-wide policy requiring emergency services to assist all travelers, regardless of appearance or affiliation. The policy is called the Eleanor Reed Directive, and it has been adopted by 17 other counties across Montana. Lily Cross received her master's degree in nonprofit leadership in 2026. She is currently being recruited by 3 different universities to develop curricula around community-based aid. She visits her father every month, and they are planning a trip to Italy together, something Maria had always wanted to do. Daryl Hammer Cross stepped down as chapter president in 2024 to focus on Feed the Stranger full-time. He still rides with the memorial rally every year, but these days he's more likely to be found at the Pinewood Diner, helping Eleanor with the breakfast rush or reviewing grant applications. Some say they're more than friends. Eleanor refuses to confirm or deny. Some things she has learned don't need to be explained. They just need to be lived. And Eleanor herself, 68 years old, 2 heart procedures, 1 pacemaker, arthritis in both knees, and more love than she ever thought possible after losing everything. She still wakes up at 5 a.m. every day, still opens the diner at 6, still makes pie from scratch and coffee strong enough to strip paint. She still sits in Michael's booth when she needs to think, still traces the carved initials, MJR, with her fingertips, still talks to Frank and Michael in the quiet moments, telling them about everything that's happened, everything she's become, She still answers the phone when strangers call, looking for help. Still drives through snow when someone needs her. Still believes, with everything she has, that kindness is the answer to most of the world's problems. And every February, she stands on Rogers Pass at sunrise and watches the motorcycles come. Thousands of them now, from across the country, across the world, coming to honor a woman who made soup for strangers and accidentally started a revolution. She doesn't think of herself as a hero, never has. She was just a woman with a truck and a diner and nothing left to lose, who made a choice in a moment when choices mattered. But maybe that's what heroes are. Maybe heroes are just ordinary people who decide, in one crucial moment, to be brave. And maybe, just maybe, there's a hero hiding in everyone. All it takes is a storm and a stranger who needs help, and the courage to say yes. The end.